You ready? All right. Yeah. Well, welcome to the our first in-person Sonoma Coast MAC meeting for 3 years-ish. So this is all very exciting. So I believe our first thing we're going to do here is the Pledge of Allegiance. So, Ginny, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Fantastic. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, I believe we will do the roll call now.
Brian Leubitz,
Here.
Beth Brazoni here. Abby Gomez. Okay. Caroline Madden here. Scott Farmer.
Present.
Jill Lippett here. Marty Campbell here. Jenny Nichols here. And Drew McCalley.
All right. Well, if everybody on the MAC has had a chance to see the agenda, I will accept a motion to approve it.
I motion to approve the agenda. Second.
Thank you very much. I believe we need to do a vote. Can we
We
do
don't
one?
have to roll call vote anymore.
Fantastic. In person. Fantastic. I guess without objection. All right. So our next item is our new member, Drew McCalley. First of all, welcome.
Thank you.
And I believe,
It's not the vote, just not roll call.
oh, okay.
All
So,
those in favor?
I guess all in favor of approving the agenda?
Aye.
All opposed? Abstentions? Okay, there we go. I apologize. So we'll go on to welcoming Drew McCalley, and I believe we need to administer the oath of office.
Thank you so much. Go ahead and raise your right hand and repeat after me. For the office of Coast MAC. For the office of Coast MAC. I, Drew McCalley. Do solemnly swear. That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And the Constitution of the State of California. And the Constitution of the State of California. Against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That I will bear true faith and allegiance. That I will bear true faith and allegiance. To the Constitution of the United States. To the Constitution of the United States. And the Constitution of the State of California. And the Constitution of the State of California. That I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. That I take this responsibility freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. And that I will well and faithfully discharge. And that I will well and faithfully discharge. The duties upon which I am about to enter. The duties upon which I am about to enter. Great. You are sworn in. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Drew. And if you'd like to get anything to say on your introduction.
Well, I'm from Sea Ranch, so I'm one of those seats alongside Marty, and my old friend Paul is who I'm replacing. And
Big shoes to fill.
yeah, right. And I'm a full-time resident of the coast, and anyway, have done a lot of stuff.
Well, we are very excited to get a chance to work with you. All right, so we're gonna move on to,
So could I tell everybody what stuff Drew that? Yeah, Drew and I served together on the Sea Ranch Association Board for a number of years. And he's currently the treasurer of RCMS, our medical center in Gualala. And he's also, I believe, the treasurer of Bodega Bay
Well, it's
Fair and Lawns
oh, it's the
Institute, I, you know.
Cordell Marine Sanctuary Foundation,
Oh,
It's very interesting.
Cordell Bank, which is.
Yeah,
right out there.
fantastic. We will move on to the consent calendar. So there are two items on the consent calendar, the approval of our minutes and the 2022 Coastal MAC Annual Report to the Board of Supervisor from last year's chair, Marty Campbell. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I so moved it.
I second.
Okay, so motion by Marty Campbell and second by Beth Pursuant. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, all in favor?
I
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, we can move right along. It's fantastic. Okay, any statements of conflict of interest from any members? Seeing none, I'll move on. I do not believe we have any correspondence. Is that correct? Kevin? Okay. Would any members like to make a report? Okay, okay. So now we are on to the public comments. So the public comment is everything except what is on the agenda. So nothing about the local coastal plan or the coastal zone vacation rental ordinance. We're going to discuss that in our agenda.
Public comment for items not on the agenda. You'll get an opportunity to comment on items on the agenda as well.
Correct. So then we would like to make a comment about anything not on the agenda. This is your time to do so.
Can I submit this?
You can just come ahead and
Hi, I'm Michael Keys, I live in Gleason Beach. This is regarding,
Can you just stand up here so that the microphone can be out? Thank you.
oh, well. Now I'm Anthony Mike, okay. I'm Mike, okay, so there's a new beach. It hasn't been named, it's called No Name Beach in Sky Creek. So I wrote to Linda and she deferred me to the state parks, and the state parks thought about it, consulted, and they said, the US Geological Service and the National Registry are the ones that decide. That's their process. But there's no name on this beach. And people are trying to call it, well, you know, my friends and I used to go out there and smoke and whatever. Let's call it after us. Well, here's the thing. If you go to the coast of California, you can find Spanish, Russian, all sorts of different influences. For example, Southern California. You'll find beaches named after the canoe makers, the Hispanics. The Pomo Indians in the Great Tribe have been here for 8,000–9,000 years. They've been using the seaweed, the mussels. This is sacred ground. I think we can do better. I think they have a process, since the Geological Service doesn't have a name, and I think we should defer to them to name this beach in honor of their heritage. This is a very important site. I went to the Pomo dictionary, and just as the place name, I was going to call it Katan Hau, which means shell beach. This is the start.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Actually, Debbie can take that. Thank you. All right, anybody else for public comment? Jim?
My name is Jim Moore. I'm the president of the Bodega Bay Range, so welcome here. And I just wanted to let you all know that we have a project to become a commercial kitchen, because during the 2017 Tubbs fires, we housed fire evacuees here. And we cooked food for them, but then on the second day of doing that, the Sonoma County Department of Public Health shut us down because we're not a commercial kitchen. So we've had this project undergoing for about 3 years now. Raised $191,000 toward $300,000 goal. And we just on February 28th at the supervisors meeting, Linda helped us get a fee waiver for the last $6,200 in the current fees. And I just wanted to acknowledge Linda's staff and their work on that for getting us there. And 2 days later, we're able to obtain the permit from Permit Sonoma that we had was 2 years in the making. So thank you very much to Linda's office.
Well, I also want to thank Jim and the Grange for hosting us here today, and it's always it's a great resource here in Bodega Bay. Thank you very much. Okay, yeah.
My name is Lynn Kelson, and I'm a volunteer with the California Native Plant Society. And I'm one of the co-chairs of the Invasive Plant Committee. And we have two projects that I'd like to tell you guys about if you don't already know about them. One of them is at Doran Park, and it's been going on for 5 years, where we've been removing ice plant from the salt marsh side of the park. And it's been super successful. It began about 5 years ago because of a rare plant that was found. But I just want to say that beyond that, it's improving the habitat for not only the rare plant, but for native plants in general. And also, so it's improving the biodiversity for plants and for animals. It improves the biodiversity for insects and therefore for birds. We have a ton of people that come to our coast for birds. So we have that project that's super successful. And then a year ago, we started a project out at Bodega Head, and we're partnering with the state parks out there to also remove ice plant from our coastal prairie, which is also a highly threatened environment in California. So if you want more information, you can go to the Native Plant Society website. We are the Milo Baker chapter, and there's information about our projects there. And in general, you might see it's around a lot more. My partner, my co-chair, and I really want to start educating the public, and specifically here on the coast. It's such our whole coast is threatened by a whole multitude of invasive species. I probably don't need to preach to the choir, but anyway, you can find out more information on CNPS, and you'll probably see more of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment?
An item's not on the agenda.
Okay, so we'll move on. Leo, do you want to, should we wait for?
I suggest that we put off
For
the
Linda.
Linda, because she's gonna be here probably in less than half an hour,
Okay.
so I
Okay,
think we should just.
so how about we, Kristen, are you ready? So I'm gonna go ahead and move. So I want to welcome Creative Sonoma Director Kristen Matson, and I'm gonna move out of the way so she can have her slide.
And the light is gonna be on. Yeah, okay.
It's going, it just takes a while to boot up.
But I'm not.
You
are. You are.
Oh,
Please
that's right,
resume.
someone Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If this, all
All right. Hi, folks. My name is Kristen Matson. I am the director of Creative Sonoma. We are an agency of the county government housed in the Economic Development Board, which I think some of you all know and have worked with. We're here to essentially support and advance the creative sector of our economy. I'm here today to talk about two initiatives that we have going on a parallel track, both in public art. So we have a public art master plan process that we've been researching and developing for the Board of Supervisors to think about for going forward. And we also have a specific public art project, which is a fire memorial, which I will talk about at the end of this. I have only a few slides to show, and they're really just consider them seasoning for the presentation. There are some local slides and some national slides for helping us understand what we mean when we talk about public art, and also hopefully be a little bit inspirational on that. We know that public art means many different things to many different people. So for our purposes, I will talk about public art as being art that is in our public realm of all types and genres of art. So now to give you a couple of examples of what we mean with art. Move forward, no advancing. There we go. Oh, it advanced. There might be a little bit of a delay. It's advanced on my screen, but not there. Do you? There we go.
There you go.
There, it just takes a little while. Okay, I'll have to remember that. Some of these you should be familiar with. Here is a beautiful mural that's in Forestville by the artist Amanda Lynn, who also has some work I think some of you will be familiar with from Guerneville. Next up, I'm going to start talking about, because it'll take a second, is the Hacienda Bridge. This is a project where we worked with the Department of Public Works because the bridge, some of you may know, has some safety issues around folks being able to get up under the bridge. There's graffiti there, so they wanted to stop the graffiti and keep people to be safer there. But instead of just building a steel barricade, we hired an artist to create a beautiful steel barricade. But what you see in the inset shot there is a, I'm going to say ceramic tile, that's not quite right. I think it's porcelain actually, tiles that have all been fabricated and will be placed in amongst the steel. So it will be a beautiful barricade. The images that are on those porcelain tiles, what you see right there is a Native American basket. The artist spent a lot of time in the area and suddenly started thinking about, think of the stories that the river has to tell. Think of all the things that have come through this river. Imagine if they had all sunk to the bottom of the river and we had a giant magnet and could call them up and look at them. And so this is reflecting what the tiles will show. So just giving you a sense of how an artist's mind works. Next up is in Guerneville, we have a temporary project, which was to create artwork on storefronts. This has happened twice now. City of Sonoma has funded this. This was the winter version. There was a version done about a year ago. And our most recent work, which some of you may already be familiar with because it just went in on the Meredith Pier. So this is a giant copper salmon. It's not a great picture, but the little round objects going down the side are half shells of giant, I don't know if they're oysters or clams or what they are. It's a lovely piece. It will soon be a little bit lovelier because we have a waiver application into the Coastal Commission to be able to place signage just inside to describe who the artist is, what it is, and give a little bit of history of why the salmon was important to the native communities that lived here and why it's been important to Sonoma. So that just gives you a little teaser of what we're talking about when we talk about public art. So I'm going to talk now briefly about our master plan project that we are putting in place. Oops, I went back too far. And then I'm going to talk about the environment. The master plan is something that was built into Creative Sonoma's original foundational document to say we ought to consider having a plan to kind of codify a little more how we go about creating art. Because right now it's a little bit haphazard, hit or miss. An opportunity comes up, we jump on it. It's not very consistent. That's hard for everybody staff-wise, and it's hard financially. So we've been working on a master plan. We began it by talking to people, going out into the community and asking what people would imagine a master plan might look like, starting with mostly the artistic community and then later branching out to broader groups of people. We had 6 focus group meetings, which had 32 attendees at them in 7 different communities across the county. We did 35 one-on-one interviews. And then we're doing now presentations like today to all the MACs. You want our 5th. And our next step on this is that we'll put the whole plan up on our website. We'll make sure everybody knows about it so you can look at the specifics of as to what has come into this plan and weigh in on how you think it might work, what the goals and objectives are, and how you like it or what you think won't work. Then it will go to the Board of Supervisors, probably sometime this summer, to determine whether they think this has been good enough work. Do we need to do more research? Is the plan right? Does it work in every community, etc. I'm not going to go into a ton of details on it. You can look at that at your leisure, but I will give you a couple of key highlights that are in the plan just to get you thinking about it. The first is to think about what are the values. Any good plan, but especially a public art plan, has to be reflective of the values in the community. So in our conversations, we ended up hearing what seemed like 6 consistent themes that became the values for this plan. The first of which is, of course, our beautiful landscape. Among the other values, we have listed our history, our creative practices, our resilience, our hunger for connection, and slide please, our diversity. So that'll come up in a second, I think. There we go. Another key element that we're trying to build into the plan is flexibility. You know, this is going to have an ordinance or a policy at least that will be passed by the supervisors. We want to allow enough flexibility to make it work in a county as big as ours, with as diverse of people as we have, and with budget, which I'll circle back to around the budget that we have. We want to be flexible in terms of the kind of art. We don't want to be too prescriptive. And especially important in Sonoma County is location. Where will this art go? And again, I'll circle back to why that's especially important in a minute here. We also are talking about working with a diverse set of partners, certainly with all of our sister agencies in the county, so Public Works, General Services, et cetera, but also state county-wide organizations like libraries. Here's an example of a really fun bike rack that is done around the library to just put an artist's mind to something that is functional and utilitarian, but gives it a little bit different lift and a little bit of a different statement of vibrancy to everyone who uses it. We also will want to work with nonprofit organizations and municipal agencies with this plan. I said I would come around to what I think is, I'll call it the elephant in the room. When you see this slide, you'll know what I'm talking about. Come on. But which is financing, obviously. So how will we do this? So we're coming up with a menu of options for the supervisors to look at. Traditionally, a public art plan is associated with capital construction projects. So when the county is getting ready to do capital projects, a community will say, we want 1% or 2%, some percentage of that capital project to go for art on that site. So that's one way to do it. Another way that gives a little more consistency and flexibility, the two things I keep talking about, is to say, rather than go capital construction project by capital construction project, we're going to take an aggregate of what is the capital construction budget in the county for the whole year and take a percentage of that. The flexibility that's allowed there is the consistency that's allowed there is we can kind of gauge year to year what that overall budget will be versus which projects get undertaken year to year. But the flexibility is a lot of the county's construction projects are really centralized in some of our central cores, not in our far-flung places, not in West County, et cetera. If we don't associate with a specific building project, then we have the flexibility to say, all right, where haven't we done art? Where is a good site in the county property? So that would help us move our art into places in the county with a little bit more flexibility. Those are just two ideas. Supervisors haven't weighed in on them yet. They will. There are other ways to fund it, but usually, as I say, it'll likely look like something associated with whatever our county's budget is for capital construction. Got one more thing to talk about with the public art plan, and then I'll shift over, and that is governance. What we also know in terms of making public artwork is certainly you need oversight of a group that's looking at this from a county perspective. So we will have a public art committee that is formed to review and evaluate all of this work. But absolutely, especially on major projects, we have to have local connection, local engagement, local community members in whose community this art will live, have the opportunity to have a voice about what it might be. So that
What is that?
What is
Oh,
this?
I know. Isn't that so great? Hopefully it won't go. I call it the woolly mammoth. Because it looks like that to me, a big elephant. That's just a wood construction it's not in Sonoma County. It's at the site of a local park. So, what I like about this in this presentation, and let me move to the next one too, is it shows how art can coexist harmoniously in a natural environment. And the next slide up will show you that as well. When he gets here. So while we're waiting for that, I'm going to pivot and go to the fire memorial. Oh, there it is. I can imagine that in Armstrong, woods. It just looks so beautiful. Okay. Fire memorial. About last spring, the supervisors approved a budget to create a fire memorial to honor the lives of those who were lost in the 2017 fire complexes. We were coming up on the 5-year anniversary. It felt like the right time to do something. They charged Creative Sonoma with putting together a plan of how we would go about doing this and creating a piece of art. So, or artwork, I'm going to say generally. We came back in the fall, showed them our plan, told them how we thought it would go, and they approved the plan. So we're going to move forward with creating a piece that is a memorial. As you can imagine, public art, can be challenging in the best of circumstances because people have opinions about art. This is going to be especially challenging for us all because the emotional freight that this memorial will carry with it, including the process of developing it, will be something everyone will have to carry very carefully as we go through this process. The first step in this process is to develop, I was just talking about advisory committees. We're developing a fire memorial task force. This will be the place where we'll have approximately 7 to 9 members. We hope that they will come from families, survivor families, from first responders, arts professionals, and community members. We would like to have a broad geographic representation. We know that the fire physically impacted certain areas, but we feel that everyone in the county was impacted by this and should have a voice. So we'll try to get that kind of representation. We would like gender diversity and ethnic diversity and racial diversity. That's a lot to ask of 7 to 9 people, but we will try to put that puzzle together the best that we can. That task force will be charged with overseeing the whole process, including the community engagement that will be done through this process, putting together the RFQs and the RFPs to generate the artists, and then actually selecting the finalists in terms of the artwork that will be prepared. We do not have a site yet, so we're working on that to bring options to the supervisors, and the committee will help us evaluate if they come together, the task force, if we get them together in time to do that. The timeline for this project, we think once we get really going full steam, it will be about 18 to 24 months. That means members of the task force will need to commit to no less than every other month, or maybe monthly meetings through that process. And the kind of artwork, because that's a question that has come up, is going to be open to this task force in terms of casting a wide net. People will have all kinds of ideas about this. We've already been receiving some ideas. It might, you think of a public art memorial and you think of a structure and a sculpture, but it might be done with landscape architecture. There might be an interactive kiosk. There might be music, sound. We don't know. I like to leave that usually to the artists to come up with creative ideas and then bring that back together to evaluate them against each other. The main reason I'm sharing the fire memorial information with you today is we would love for you, if you are interested in throwing your hat in the ring to the task force, to please do so, or if you know people that should at least know about this opportunity, to know about it. And the best way to do that is to go to our website and just type in creativesonoma.org/fire. And there will bring you lots more information than I gave you today. There are also our 2 press releases about this at the back of the room. It's actually the same press release, but one in English and one in Spanish. So if you want to take that with you and pass that to folks that you think might be interested, that would be terrific. Oh, sorry, there's one more piece, which is that, let's see, is the timing? No, sorry, past the deadline on that one. So that's it. So that's my presentation, and I am open, I guess, to what comes next. Any questions?
You can take questions, and if people ask questions from the audience, if you can repeat them. Yeah, you got it. Thank you.
So audience first, or does it matter? Or?
Chair.
Yes, if anybody has any questions, go ahead. I'm gonna do some AV work.
Should we start with Scott over here?
In your program, there's space for placing art in wildland settings where it's unexpected. And what comes to mind is the Harold Richardson Grove, for example, which will be a wonderful place and deserving of something unexpected. I just use that as an example,
Yeah.
but things tend to be where lots of people are.
That's right. I'm with you on that. And as long as there is a space and access and rights and funding, the answer to me will always be yes. So we got to put those pieces of the puzzle together, but yes, absolutely. Anybody else in the room?
Any
Any
questions?
questions or comments? All right. Well, then I will say thank you so much for inviting me and letting me be on your agenda. Yep. Oh, I didn't stop sharing.
That's okay.
That would help.
Yeah, well, I want to say thank you very much, Kristen. I think it was very informative and good, and we love our Santa.
Yeah, I'm so glad. We do too. And I forgot to say Daniel Clark. That's very important. The name of the artist, who is a resident of West County. I think he might literally be in Bodega Bay, maybe a little bit. So you have artists who created that. Oh, got it. Oh, great. Great. Thank you. I'm glad to be. All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so
Good luck.
much. Okay,
Brian? Yes. Could we move things around so Linda's here?
yeah, I know, I wanted to, Leo, can you do the staff report now, or,
No, we could, if you like,
because I know that a lot of folks would like Linda to be here during the LCP this
yeah, and Linda definitely wants, she said that her priority was to hear what everybody had to say about it. I didn't know if you wanted to potentially go through. I'm not sure what kind of a presentation you want. Like we have slides prepared for the entire package that
Okay,
from Mr. Master board to do, but I don't think it's a great use of time to go through all of them, but
Yeah,
I didn't know.
I mean, I think that, I know, there's a couple of people who have, C is going to present, some material on a couple of the items. And then I know we have some other people who are interested, but I believe that, I think probably you would prefer that Supervisor Hopkins would be here.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear what other people have to say first.
Right. Okay, well,
Linda should be here soon, so I can either do the presentation and then you could, if you like, either go into public comment and then have the MAC members' comments, because I know that we want to maximize Linda hearing both the MAC's comments as
Right.
well as the public, or if
Well,
you would,
how-
if you want to jump to the.
what,
the-
in terms of the presentation, how long would that be?
I think it's as short or long as you want
Okay.
it to be,
So-
because it's really just, we have in slide format more, like each of the decisions that permit Sonoma laid out for
In the
the
policy.
board. It's like 50 different decisions.
Okay.
So, I mean, I could do like a 5-minute, like overview, just sort of
Okay.
explaining where we are in the process.
I think
but-
that would be fantastic. And then, for those of you, who don't have the packet on hand. First of all, if you don't have the packet, there's, in the packet, there is a document called what is it called? The
Policy.
Policy options. So it's rather thick. And there's several different, amendments that are coming from the planning commission's document in October, correct? It arose out of so if you want to go on the Sonoma Coast MAC website, on the agenda for item, this document, this rather long document is in the, there we go. Debbie has a bunch of copies.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so, yeah, Leo, you want to use the projector?
Sure.
Okay,
I mean, I can at least put up,
Yeah.
topics. Oh, I don't think, actually, you know what? I'll just screen share, so then it doesn't matter. if My face is on.
okay, well, I think this is the projector if you want to do on here, if you want to do
I
the
think
slides.
we have Zoom set up, so I can actually send it
Yeah,
wirelessly.
But still.
I gotta turn this on.
Then.
Understood, got it.
Yeah. We're going to include that? Yes.
And it's just everything's just slow because of.
Yes, it's gotta go up to the. Back then.
or we can do it without. I mean, the slides just have the same material that, it's just not wanting to let me share. It's giving me- I think it's just kind of a memory. Or, those things.
Is there particular information we were wanting to?
No, I was just trying to put the list of topics on the screen, so I'm sorry, it's not something that's so important that it merits.
While Leo was setting that
It's
up, I
just not allowed.
apologize for the little cough. I've got an allergy issue. I ran it, I had an encounter with an irritant yesterday and it just seems to keep picking off, but I'll stay away from everybody.
That's fine, I mean, why don't we just do without? this?
We all have the list.
Yeah,
right
yeah,
here.
yeah.
So
Okay.
Right, so, we had discussed the possibility of asking Firma Sonoma to be here tonight, but they're in the planning commission right now. And I think the purpose of this meeting was for the public and for the MAC members to share their feedback with Supervisor Hopkins, so that when it reaches the board phase, that they'll be able to understand what all of your feedback is. We have been pushing Firma Sonoma to get their information up as quickly as possible. And so where we are in the process is that the planning commission made recommendations to the board of supervisors. The board of supervisors heard those recommendations and gave guidance to the department, to Firma Sonoma, saying that were a list of things that they wanted further discussion on. And this document, it was created by Firma Sonoma in response to what they heard the board of supervisors say they needed more details and options on. So that's the list of policy options that you all have, that you picked up in the back or that you picked up online. This was their best effort to summarize what they viewed the issues that the board gave them guidance on to further consider. And so since then, they put it online and put it out to the public to react to. And so I'm impressed that the MAC is taking this on and willing to sort of provide this venue for all of you to provide feedback in advance to Linda. And, you know, this is being recorded, and so to anyone in the public, so that there's some additional consideration before it reaches the board on April 4th. So that's basically just the timeline information. You all have the packet. I mean, just for the record, I'll just read through the bullet points. I won't spend a long time on them. The topics that the Planning Commission highlighted were the issues of agricultural fencing, support for the UC Davis Bodega Marine Laboratory, expanded opportunities for new campgrounds, public access to the Estero Americano, biofuel management, preservation of non-commercial forests and woodlands, onshore facilities related to offshore wind energy or seabed mining, reintroduction of sea otters to the Sonoma coast, site-specific policies for visitor-serving development, and subdivision of agricultural lands to support small family farms. And then not a bullet point that they had, but there's also some technical corrections that they include in that package. So that's kind of the framework that we're in right now in advance of the board hearing the item again on the 4th. So Brian, I don't know if you want to go through any process of either like running through the different points, or if you want to just let people speak to the things that they have opinions on, whether it's part of this package or anything else that they want to highlight related to the LCP.
So they can speak on any
Right.
comment on the entire LCP.
My personal opinion is that you're gonna get furthest because there's like 50 things that the board's gonna have to weigh in on. But I think that it's appropriate if there's something else that needs to be highlighted that, you know, you may have highlighted in the past that wasn't heard, or that you heard the board ask for but wasn't captured by Permit Sonoma. Or you're late to the game, but there's something that's very important to you. I think that it would be appropriate to share that. I think we just need to be aware that the board is hearing it on April 4th, and this is the framework that the department has created as the structure. I mean, the board could throw it out if it doesn't work for them, but we also know that this has been a long process and a long time coming.
Okay. Why don't we have, so I know Steve has a rather more complete.
Yeah, let everyone else.
Yeah, so why don't we go ahead and, let's look at a few of the items. And if anybody has any comments on specific items on here that you've had a chance to.
No.
Is everyone familiar with the LCP? That's probably the first question to ask.
Here.
In this room.
Yeah.
So, you know, as you all know, the county has been working on the local coastal plan update since 2015, I think.
Yes.
When it began. So it's been a long process, and it's gone through many different layers and discussion, and so the scheduled vote on April 4th would be the last one in the county. So sort of, or in terms of input, it's sort of now or never. So but let's go ahead and go through these by topic. So if anybody has any comment on the agricultural fencing, either on the committee or council first.
Are we gonna do the maps and then the public, or just the public?
Council first.
I think, yeah, so we'll do council first on each item, and then if anybody else has any thoughts on any of them. But did any of the MAC when I talk about the agricultural fencing?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the agricultural fencing, there's two issues within the proposed.
Can you come closer to the,
Yes,
Why don't
yes.
thank you.
People can take the podium.
Yeah, the podium, or just as long as the owl can see it.
And I can still see if I can get the slides to share. I can tell on my screen if they're working, and then we can.
There are two issues within the agricultural fencing that are of great concern to agriculture. One of them is the issues with the riparian corridor and the setbacks. The other is the sizing of the fencing for wildlife friendly fence. What's being asked of us is that we have a fence that it's no more than 40 inches high, 16 inches off the ground. That's not to keep any animal in or out. The request is so that wildlife can flow, but it's completely useless to keep animals in our properties and other, you know, and to keep people out too. So that's a big deal. So agricultural community is asking that be completely removed from the LCP. There's already state laws that regulate fencing. We don't need to have another layer of that within the LCP. Fencing is a principally permitted right. And there's a carve out for it, for lack of better terminology, and it's excluded for need to have a permit, yet it's being requested of us to get permits for our fencing in the chapter in the LCP. Thank you.
I'd like to add to that, agricultural enterprise.
So that's another, yeah,
That's
that's,
been introduced, and it's defined as a primary income of 51% or more for a farm or a ranch. And I think that nowadays, you know, it's rare to find somebody that gets their sole income from a farm. And also people that aren't selling their produce, but have gardens, feed themselves, also need to have special fencing. And I'll just point out, we'll have to change our logo because the grape stake fence looks like it's going out.
So the agricultural enterprise that is there, the terminology is pretty much that you have to derive 51% or more of your income from agriculture. It's so expensive to do agriculture in this state. I don't know anyone other than maybe one particular rancher that derives more than 51% of their income from agriculture. So for us, for agriculture to have to be put to this, have to start to provide their incomes verification IRS is an unneeded burden. It would also squeeze out the little guy completely, that just wants to feed their family or wants to supplement their income. We're asking the term agricultural enterprise be completely removed from the LCP, and agricultural operations currently in the LCP, which is part of the Right to Farm Act, be the only type of agricultural litmus test, for lack of better terminology, that exists.
Planning department, what are they recommending? Are they supporting with the removal of it, or are they recommending the board of supervisors to keep the limiting, right to them?
Right, so there's in this document,
Yeah, which I haven't read.
right, so they recommend a number of things. One is to change the agricultural enterprise. And then there's a new policy in there, so revising two of the policies on fencing and development.
So in essence, the planning commission, and you're talking about the planning commission or permit Sonoma?
Permits now, what are they recommending to the board of supervisors?
It's my understanding that they agree that there's some issues with the wildlife friendly fence. Yet they feel between a rock and a hard spot, and they're looking to find a middle ground at this point still. Did that answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
And just their formal recommendation in the staff packet is policies B, C, and D. So that would include the agricultural enterprise and then two other revisions.
Yeah.
Just go ahead. So,
I think there's a tension between trying to protect wildlife, and then there's trying to keep animals contained in a husbandry
Yes,
situation. And so they're trying to find the middle ground. And they're using agricultural enterprise to say, okay, if you are this, you can have that. If you're not that, you have to have this. But there's a huge middle space that's not being addressed.
absolutely. And we live in a right to farm state and right to farm county, and there are no qualifiers. So to add agricultural enterprise as a prerequisite to do basic ag maintenance, it is problematic.
right. See,
My understanding is that there was a planning commission version that the agricultural community, the planning commission draft. That was publicly discussed and where agriculture had input. And then there was this policy paper that came out with a bunch of different recommendations that the agricultural community is having difficulty with. So this distinction may be between what was decided in the planning commission versus what has been suggested afterwards in these policy papers. Would that be correct?
That's correct. Agriculture did not have a hand in any of what you're seeing in the LCP. That's been a huge point of contention.
And more specifically in this policy paper.
And nothing to do with the policy papers, yes.
So if people speak from the audience, they're not going to be recorded for the video. So just come up. You have to be within like 10 feet of the machine.
I think we should just have you sit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pull up a chair.
all right. Is there anything else on this item? Okay, so is there any discussion about the support for the BML, the Big and Marine Map?
Real quick,
Sure.
I just like to say they've been a really good community resource. My kids, when they went to school up on the coast, they would visit, and be toured and get exposed to something really rich. One of our neighbor's son interned there, and now he has a career in marine biology in Hawaii. It's really great to have it here.
It's also the Marine Lab hosted our fundraising event It's a beautiful, beautiful space, and they're gonna reopen for tours soon, so you should go.
The Marine Lab is absolutely stunning and very much, it adds something very unique to our community. There is an issue within the agricultural community trying to understand why this particular policy is suddenly coming to life. And maybe Supervisor Hopkins, you can tell us more.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide context on the Bodega Marine Lab. So sort of once we had gone through the planning commission process, we heard from a number of stakeholders who felt as though they had not been adequately consulted. And so we held an all-day meeting over at the Bodega Bay Yacht Club, in which we had SMAC members present as well, and kind of brought folks in sort of in shifts for staff to hear directly from them. And although we hadn't heard from them, I actually proactively reached out to the Bodega Marine Lab, recognizing that they have never been part of the LCP, but they're a critical part of our community. And also that I think that there's a lot of positive and kind of trying to strengthen the relationship between the county and the Bodega Marine Lab to do amazing work, and for them to be able to share data, maybe to take into consideration some of our concerns, and also just to provide input on the LCP, because, you know, they live and breathe our marine ecosystems. And so what came out of that hour-long sort of meeting between myself and staff and a couple of the Bodega Marine Lab representatives was this policy that came forward. And so it was really about, they identified a couple ways in which they thought that partnering with the county would be a positive thing. And by the way, we did just approve the renewal of the contract for their lease of the tidelands to continue to, you know, conduct research where they have conducted research for decades in Bodega Bay, studying the benthic habitat there. Was really sort of, hey, could you, you know, do something that would support our ability to continue research in an ongoing way? Because there have actually been instances in which, you know, they were sort of not, they were struggling actually to gain access to coastal resources purely for scientific research purposes. And that was something that we felt that we'd see a value in, is continuing to collect that data and supporting the academic research. That's really what, where this policy kind of came from, was directly staff talking to the Bodega Marine Lab.
And I just want to add that anything that they do below the mean high tide line, they're required to get permits from the Greater Carolinas National Marine Sanctuary. So this isn't about just trusting completely in anything that they put forward. There are still a lot of different vetting opportunities for any type of research that they're interested in doing. Other organizations that would have to provide those permits.
And actually, one of the sort of reasons that they wanted this policy was that they have had, unfortunately, at times, grad students who were sometimes intimidated away by private property owners at various places along the coast from doing research that was actually already permitted on places that they were allowed to do it. And so they felt like having this would be sort of a, you know, community recognition of that. And also, if at some point, you know, they were applying for whether it's, you know, state or federal funds, or they were undertaking something, this would also allow us in our legislative platform to support their efforts and say, hey, we support academic research of our coastal resources. And as he said, there are already other measures in place to make sure that they're not going out there and disturbing habitat, which of course is not their intent anyway. Like, they're out there, I mean, they have active restoration projects, right? They're trying to rehabilitate our marine ecosystem.
Go ahead.
Yeah, real quick. Well, the intent here is to support the lab, and we're just so fortunate to have this resource. But this doesn't cover anywhere near what needs to be covered to get them the support for you. We're not recognizing all of what they do. And I think we need some more meetings to say, what, I mean, the events they hold down, they have Wednesday seminars. They come down with, they have sort of a wine and dine presentations. They have interns from all over the world. Now, these interns are always looking for places to stay and things to do. But what we haven't done is we haven't sort of form a link between the county and these interns. For example, left on their own, they have to compete with the University of California, San Diego State, all these other labs for projects. But you know, really, they could help us. I mean, the whole, for example, the abalone industry, it's gone. The recreational. What happened? Starfish have a problem. I mean, they're going soft, and the sea urchins take over the habitat. Well, other places like Monterey Bay, they have interns go down there and squashing and collecting sea urchins. Done deal. I think high school students might be able to do that. Certain interns
So
could work.
this isn't disputing any of that. This is saying
Yeah.
that they get a carve out, like,
My point is to augment this policy to include local educational and practical restoration efforts, basically.
so the policy before us, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is to give the Marine Lab a carve out so they can take any place they step foot will be treated, or any place they have legal use of, will, a lease or by right of, permission, they will then be able to take the same authority they have at the Marine Lab, because they currently have a carve out. This isn't new, right? They don't have to abide by the same rules as, say, somebody just wanting to get into scientific research, which is fair. Yet they want to take that, impose it on the new places that they do research. Is that the purpose behind this? I just want to understand.
Well, it's sort of to try to create programmatic efficiencies and kind of a formalization of the relationship between the Coastal Commission and the Bodega Marine Lab, and to provide some clarification. Because actually, so this was a really interesting conversation. We sat around a table with two representatives from the Bodega Marine Lab, and our staff was like, we assumed that our LCP couldn't even apply to you. And they're like, actually it could, and it could help us, sort of have programmatic processes with the Coastal Commission and provide some clarity around, how the permitting processes go forward. And because it sort of feels like in some ways it was kind of confusing for all of the agencies. And so this is also to really to provide that level of clarity. But I love your suggestion. And that's the kind of thing that could be, rather than a formal policy, it could be a program or an initiative, that the initiative is, we want to support, collaborative educational opportunities in which we utilize, the academic research being conducted at the Bodega Marine Lab to, educate the local coastal community. So if you think a little bit more about that and you have some language that you want to suggest, I would love to carry it forward to the board meeting. And again, it wouldn't be like a hardcore policy, but there are all these other opportunities that we can put in. They're a little bit more like, this is something we would support and that we would like to do. So
They would need to get whatever easements are necessary. They can't just step on your property and start doing research. They have to have complete authority to be there. The property would have to be used in the historically same way it's been used. If they put up a new building of any type, it would have to go through the full permit process as well.
That would all be sort of directly between the Bodega Marine Lab and the Coastal Commission, like new buildings and new development.
Oh, okay, so then they would not be held to the same standards as, say, if I wanted to put up a new barn, I have to go through a particular process. They wouldn't be held to those same standards?
I'm not the right person to answer that, because this is sort of a slightly unique thing in that they are actually a state agency, so they have kind of a different level of standing.
Okay.
With the Coastal Commission. My understanding is that they would be subject to the same scrutiny and the same process, but that they don't necessarily go through the county. And actually, even at the county, right, there are only certain types of permits that we handle sort of directly ourselves, right? And then some of it still gets through the Coastal Commission. So and it's always appealable anyways. Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know. Steve, do you have any additional information on the relationship? This is just from what I've heard from staff and then from talking to the Bodega Marine Lab, but I've never actually consulted the Coastal Commission directly on it.
My belief is that they would have to abide by the California Coastal Act, just like anyone else. It's just that is Coastal Commission original jurisdiction, right? So the county is just trying to create a process where the Marine Lab would be able to conduct their research and have a streamlined communication with the Coastal Commission on research projects. So it doesn't mean that they get a carve out from the Coastal Lab.
Okay, great, thank you.
This gentleman had his hand up.
I just wanted to comment quickly on what you were talking about, because I just got back from working the state in regards to a very similar idea. And it seems to me, Linda, that you're talking about just basically the collaboration between the county and the Bodega Marine Lab. And what it sounded like you were speaking about was more or less a state or coastal, collaboration, a larger picture, something that we could educate and reach out to people to kind of help them understand what we can do, or what the lab can do, or how can we work with each other to be able to get this process or whatever it is accomplished.
And open them up to more funding.
So basically support their academic research through formal advocacy on our part. Yeah,
Right.
So one of
that can also
the,
be a program.
one of the things in the community that is kind of ruffling some feathers with this is PRMD or Permit Sonoma has made a couple of statements to some community members saying, such as, well, this one I heard directly to myself, so it's best to use this one. This way, 15 students can come and go every day and nobody can say a word about it. So that kind of those statements kind of make the community a little bit concerned.
So I wanna move on because we have some other ones which may be more contentious.
Okay.
Than this one. So,
I just wanted information.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
great.
I told you, I'm just, we
Yep.
have a couple other things which I think some of them are. So the campgrounds. Expanding access to campgrounds. Does anybody have any comments on that? Go ahead, Scott.
Initially, it looks like it's seeking to replace campsites that are lost to sea level rise, 1-to-1 ratio. But as I read it on, it's not clear to me whether it's encouraging more private campgrounds to be born. Does someone have a clarity on that?
So I don't have clarity on the interpretation, but I can provide a little bit of, context around the intent. So this was a direct response from a request from regional parks over a conversation that I have had with them for several years now, which is what are we going to do when Doran is underwater, right? It is one of the most popular parks in the entire Sonoma County Regional Park System and one of the most affordable, beautiful opportunities, to stay on the Sonoma coast. And so also this is a matter of public record. We are currently in negotiations to potentially acquire Chancellor Ranch. We have had conversations about, could that potentially provide some campground opportunities, to offset, like basically sort of pre-plan for the future when sea level rise, when we lose Doran, and as well as a number of other state parks too. Can we start looking at the upland side to create camping opportunities for folks in our community? And so this language came out, basically between Steve Arrett and Gary Helfrich, working on this to try really to support the ability to expand regional parks. Private campgrounds was not the intention, but if there needs to be some clarity around that, I'm happy to ask that question at the board meeting, because we don't want to, the biggest challenge is whenever you monkey around with policy in the coast, you create unintended consequences. But the goal here really was to say, hey, even if there are potentially some visual impacts, they did a great job at Jenner Headlands of blending the bathroom in, right? You can barely see that thing. But trying to recognize that there may be some impacts that can't be entirely mitigated of visuals of like someone's tent being on a hillside, essentially, right? As temporary use. So that was the intent of that policy, and that was at the request directly of regional parks. But I think that the private campground and the potential for wider spread proliferation is an excellent question and one I can bring up at the board.
And please correct me if I'm wrong, but in the planning commission meetings, they discussed this as well, to target agriculture for those people that didn't have restrictions on their property, potentially to be able to stack their income and potentially have a private appropriate campground.
I did not listen to the full entirety of the planning commission meeting, but so I can't speak to what they discussed. But I do know that this was sort of after
Mhm.
it went through the planning commission. Regional parks was still concerned about their ability to move forward and develop new campus.
So I'm not necessarily opposed to private campgrounds, but I just wanted to understand.
Yeah, and I'm not either, but I think that there's definitely a concern of like, does this mean they're going to be everywhere, right? Versus, obviously, yes.
It would have to be
Moderation.
very well vetted. If it was on a ranch or something, there'd have to be a lot of stuff.
There'd still be a permitting process.
No, absolutely.
So, okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the Estero. So do you have any comments about the public access to the Estero?
You're on, Brad.
Okay, so I think some clarification is important in this. There is legal, well-documented public access to the Estero Americana at Marsh Road in Marin County, at the Marin Sonoma County border. There is legal access to the Estero through the mouth of the Estero Americana. There has been, there's been an easement purchased on a ranch kind of in the middle on the Sonoma County side that there's been conversation about having some access to. However, there has been many, many years of ongoing litigation, very expensive litigation for the county and the property owners, because the easement did not include many things, especially setback for turn lane, setback for ESHA, setback for endangered species. So that's not looking like it'll ever be a viable option. There's also been great concern about trespassing on local ranches. If there's a map that, as part of the path for the LCP, proposed public access sites. And there have been great, actually documented trespassing that has resulted from these public access points. And there is concern about that continuing. So it's kind of giving both sides of it. You know, there are people that want the access and it exists and it's wonderful access. There are people who want more access. There are ranchers that have great frustration with trespassing, trash. I could just go on and on. I'd like to also add the Estero Americana. It's beautiful, very dangerous. It's difficult to read water, I'm told. There have been many rescues. Very recently, there was, well, about a year ago, a little boy drifted off in a canoe, and his grandparents, actually his father and grandfather, got out of the canoe, walked onto a private ranch, and then the canoe drifted out, and then they got stuck in the mud, one of them up into their armpits trying to get back to the little boy. He has a story to tell. He was rescued by Henry I, but nonetheless, it could have gone very, very differently. That's just one of many issues. So it's not that people are saying there is no access. Some people want more access.
Yeah, so one update is that actually, the pre-existing access on the Marin side, has since been blocked.
It's
by
not
Mar-
blocked. I've been there many times. It's not blocked. It's simply, they're not supposed to be taking boats down there. You aren't, and they simply, you can walk, I've been there several times. You can walk your canoe, walk your kayak in. Marin County, in respect to the degradation that was going on at the Marsh Road put in. They put a K-rail, a concrete K-rail and some dirt on top of it so that trailers, trucks, the whatnot could not drive down into the water. And then they couldn't leave their vehicles parked there, preventing other people from having access to the Estero Americana. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to talk to Marin County about this at all.
No, I actually reached out, but didn't hear back, but I've heard from a number of folks, including Jerry Dodrell, who has the art studio in Bodega, that a number of kayakers can no longer access the site because they're not capable of walking such a huge distance to get their boats in the water. They didn't even sort of block it like close to the water access. They blocked it quite a ways back, which makes it really challenging for anyone.
Sure, that would be tough, but kayaking is such a rigorous undertaking. If you can't walk your kayak in, I think you'd have really some problems getting in.
I actually disagree. We actually have an ADA access kayaking launch site in Bodega Bay, and we have a number of folks who utilize it who are perfectly capable in their upper body, but have challenges with limited mobility in their legs.
Fair enough. And I think that as far as ADA access at Marsh Road, I think that's something that could be potentially worked on. I'm confident of that.
Well, just for everyone's benefit, I
Yeah.
think in our conversation this morning with Gary Helfrich,
Mhm.
planner at Permit Sonoma, what he said, the issue is that they have official documentation sent to them from Marin County saying that the access is closed. It's county-owned land, and they have sent either the board or the official planner that it's closed. So I
Mhm.
understand maybe you have
I've seen the
you can get
document.
different
I've seen it.
information, but they have to use the information that's been formally provided to them. So that's kind of the situation that it sounds like we're in right now. So we'll have to see how that.
So what went to Gary Helfrich wasn't that it's closed. What went to Gary Helfrich was that Marin County does not want their public access on Sonoma County's maps. There was a dispute as to whether or not it was public or private property. That dispute has since been put to bed. It is absolutely where that launch site is. It is absolutely public property.
But it is closed with a large K-rail and a huge
Not
pile of dirt in front of it.
but it's not closed. So,
Well, I mean, I think.
It sounds like you can submit,
So-
your sort of.
So I do want to move on, and if anybody else has any
Can I
comments
make a
about.
quick comment?
Sure,
I'd
absolutely.
just like to say I would support having a Sonoma County access. And I've used the Marin County one and it's really rugged to use. And I am a very fit person and that was before the K-rail. And there's also extremely limited parking there.
Yeah.
And so, and it's highly sought after. So I would totally support something that Sonoma County could
So
provide.
so
I
my,
would like to, hold on. I would like to say something, I'm going to sort of to echo your statement. I've kayaked from that launch as well. And this was before the K-rail. And we got there at about like 8:30 and like we were the last car that was able to park. And so that's excluding most people who can do that because it's at 8:30 in the morning, it's pretty cold, even in the summertime. And so, hold on.
sorry,
We should have, I mean, I've also done it from the other end with Sonoma Land Trust to come into going down their access, which is great. But it also is down there at the end, it's kind of dangerous because the wind can get so strong that you can get swept towards the mouth. And then you have some people who in, marginally ocean qualified kayaks ending up close to the ocean, which is bad. So in an ideal world, the slow moving easy part would be more accessible either through either working with Marin County or with a new Sonoma County access. So.
and no one's disputing, if there is a property owner that wants to sell that easement for that purpose and it goes through the proper process, no one is disputing that that's their right as a property owner. The issues are that the one access that's being proposed in the middle, that property owner did not sell an access to the water. They didn't sell the corresponding easements to protect wildlife and biotic resources too.
And I'd like to provide a little bit of clarification on this issue, which is that we actually have two property owners who do believe in and want public access in that area. One is the Sonoma Land Trust and one is the Wildlands Conservancy. And throughout the entire local coastal plan, we have these hypothetical dots on private property that are just saying at some point, if there's an opportunity to acquire this property or there is a willing landowner, we would love to have public access in this area. And it's not even actually intended to be like a specific dot on a specific location. It's really sort of identifying a general area where we'd like to improve coastal access. In this particular area, the Estero, there have been a number of very active neighbors who have been very resistant to any kind of public access. And they lobbied me for years to actually fully privatize the road and get the county to abandon the right of way on the road, which we refused to do, at which point they started lobbying other supervisors to do so. If we were to take this action and abandon those public access points, in my opinion, it should be done across the entire coast because it seems very kind of ironic to just do it in one area and not the rest. So it would create a substantial inconsistency in the local coastal plan. And I personally support keeping public access points on simply because it helps us get money. And if and when there is a willing seller, then we could go to the Coastal Conservancy or the Advent Open Space District and say, look, this is part of our public access plan in the long run. And we like to move forward with that. We have actually, I've met with the property owners. We agreed to move the dot because apparently right now the dot really falls on their driveway, which they believe can create confusion.
Not the other one.
And so we can absolutely move the dot and I'm happy to do that. And we also discussed signage as well, in terms of education. There actually is already signage noting that, there is no public access, but we are more than happy to augment that signage. So just want to clarify that.
So
I'm the other.
So I just want to, please raise your hand.
Oh,
So-
I'm
so-
sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Everyone was.
Yeah, go ahead. I know, I'm trying to exert some control. Go ahead.
I am one of the other neighbors, I guess Linda was referring to, and the problem with the point on our property is you have to actually cross private property to get to it. And it's very unclear. I mean, we have, and it's not Sonoma Land Trust's fault. I'm not saying it's their fault, but we have people who
who say they're with Sonoma Land Trust. We have people who have said they're from the Marine Lab. We have people who say they get pings to meet people there. We have, I mean, you name it and we've heard it. And I just don't think there should be an access point on a property that's a public access point that you have to cross other people's private property to get to it. It just doesn't make sense.
There is no access point. There is a proposed access point, which is very clearly delineated in the sort of key of the map. So there's nothing that says that there is an access point, and there's signage that says that there's no public access.
Sadly, I wish the public understood it that way as well.
But because you need to come through me, so we're not having.
Oh, I'm
a
sorry.
Conversation. So, because we've spent a lot of time on this issue and it's already 6:55, so, and we have half
Should
an
we
hour
move
left
on?
to go through the rest. of it.
Yes.
Yes, so.
We haven't even gotten to the contentious.
So,
Well, I don't want to cut off.
so, okay, so let's go on and we'll try to just be cognizant of that, you know, we all have, we need to be out of here by a little after 7:30. And so we have about less than 45 minutes, so we need to move on. So the next one is fire fuel management. So I'm gonna let Marty go ahead.
We have some subject matter experts in the audience.
Yes, I realize that. Then don't look over your shoulder. So, we had submitted a letter to, Permit Sonoma about, fire-related clearing around homes in the coastal zone. And, the fact that current policy appears to be that except for the Sea Ranch, which has a legal exclusion, homeowners have to get a local, a CDP, a coastal development permit to do 4291 clearing around their house. And this option is supposed to address that issue. But it doesn't say that people who want to do legally allowed fire clearing around their house can go ahead and do it. It says that their greater area has to get coastal commission approval for a quote, public works plan that is certified by the coastal commission, and then they can do it. And I don't understand what that means. For example, does that mean that people who live in Timber Cove have to get together and create a public works plan for being able to do 4291 clearing around their houses and create a border and file lots of paperwork and go through a comprehensive plan to the coastal commission, or is Permit Sonoma going to be able to do that? And then within that plan, people can clear around their home. And so it's not clear what this means. And I'm not an expert about bureaucratic tree language, and maybe our two experts in the audience are more expert in bureaucratic tree language than I am. But we want to make it so that people can clear around their houses for fire reasons. And evidently for rain and wind reasons too. So, and I don't think this cuts it. And maybe in Gary Helfrich's mind, because he does understand bureaucratic tree language, this does address that, but as a person, an ordinary person with higher education, that's not what it appears to say. Thank you.
I'd actually love to transfer this question over to these guys in the corner. Because I mean, I believe that this was Gary's attempt to respond to your request, but I don't think that it, I mean, I actually would love to see language proposed by our partners over there in the corner and some improvements suggested.
So Ben Nichols and Matt Green.
I am not a registered
Of
professional
great
forester.
This today was the first Ben Nichols had heard.
Scott, you want to go ahead?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'd just like to add
I
that
apologize.
the focus has been around your house and roads, but there's a forest, and that shouldn't be left outside. I think, we started talking about this, I was hoping that we would make it easy to do the right thing. If you get out on Saturday morning and you get your loppers and you start clearing brush, dead things, limbing up, creating a shaded fuel break, so that when a wildfire does come through, it cleans out the underbrush and the forest is still there revitalized. And it's as they.
That's what's in 4291.
So they're gonna talk about that. So I think we're moving in the wrong direction with their newest proposal. I'm gonna stop because these guys are gonna fill in if anyone else.
It looks like people are demanding that,
And Matt's gonna tell you it's never easy to do the right thing in forestry because government makes it impossible. So, right?
No, not impossible. In some cases, it makes it possible because of grant funding and help. I mean, absolutely. My name is Matt Green. I'm a registered professional forester. I live right on the break of the coastal commission line, and I've been managing forest lands in Sonoma County for 24 years now. There is a letter on file from the planning commission or the board of supervisors meeting from 2020 when we kind of started getting into this rabbit hole that kind of explains some of this stuff. And the nexus of it is, and I had to go back to my letter, but basically vegetation removal is only permitted inside the coastal zone with an approved timber harvest plan. This means that if you have a grant and you don't have a timber harvest plan, you have to get a coastal development permit. If you are utilizing a forest fire prevention exemption or a 150-foot defensible space permit, you still have to get a coastal development permit to do this work. There are some simple changes that could be done. That would probably take, going from the county's perspective to the coastal commission and saying, these are the changes we want. There is the do nothing and just let it be. And then there's what's been proposed here. The two options basically lay out. Sorry, I got to go back to the notes here. One is to come up with best management practices to do vegetation work in the coastal zone. And then what I'm reading into here is that they will either establish a permit or ask for an exemption. It's not clear what they're actually saying there to me, Linda. If they're gonna create their own permit, okay, but we already have permits in place. We don't need to go creating another regulatory hurdle here to do this work. CAL FIRE's permits, 150-foot defensible space, 300-foot defensible space, forest fire prevention exemptions allow us to do all of this stuff. We just can't use those permits currently in the coastal zone because it says timber harvest plan expressly. The option two is to go through what's called the Public Works project, and it's unclear who is going to pay for that. But those costs are massive. I mean, you're talking $250,000, $500,000 probably to do a Public Works project because of where it's located. You're talking about the most biologically sensitive area in Sonoma County. Almost all of our endangered species are right there on the coast. You're talking about all the botanical species that are there. And then on top of that, you're talking about one of the most culturally diverse places for all of the Kashia's lands and Grayton's lands. I mean, the amount of sites that are in the coastal zone is massive. So the cost to do that, who's going to pay for that? It's not clear in this who's going to pay for it. Not just now, but in the future. Because the way that these public works projects, you've got to reevaluate them every 10 years. So, you know, it's not just now, it's in the future. There, as I read through this, there's a lot of language in here that the staff is reaching for definitions of their own things. For example, the term non-commercial forest land. There isn't a piece of forest land in this county that isn't commercial. One canopy tree can be sold for firewood. So by definition, every piece of forest land can be commercialized. It's just the terminology that is getting used here is being mixed up and not really following the forest practice rules. The simplest change out of all of this is to go to the Coastal Commission and ask for THP or timber harvest plan to be removed from the document and simply say any of the CAL FIRE projects, be it a grant project through their CC or climate and or CCI program, their exemption programs, or their CFIP program also meet, you know, the standards so that we can utilize the existing permit structure that's in place for everywhere else in the entire state other than in the coastal. That would be the simplest fix. It's a simple change of the language. If we're going to go these other ways, there is a massive cost to the county, to the taxpayers, to the public. You know, it's staggering. Everybody's seen the wind damage that's happened over the last 2 months. It's a direct result of the state of our forests. It is dying. You know, the Bishop Pine have been a huge contributing factor to this. Sudden oak death is hitting us pretty hard these days. A lot of the trees that we have experienced the mortality of, it's because of the state of our forests, and we need to really be proactive. So,
Okay, so I saw another, yeah, oh, there you go, there. Go ahead.
That's a great starter here. I just want to compliment it, but this is not a one size fits all. When we talk about Sonoma Coast, I don't think about forests. I think really about what used to be a pastoral California that is now really ranch fallows and urban wildlife benefits. I think those two elements are missing. And I do agree that we need to, you know, you're on point with what needs to be done there, but you know, when we talk about forest health and fire resilience public works plans, wait a minute, you know. We don't have a public work plan in a commercial forest. We have a wildland interface, we have parks. So this, as it currently sits, is a little off base. It need really to go through a little bit more of a design and focus really on where our threats are. Urban wildland, like you mentioned, you know, the next to the houses, and we work with the parks. I mean, we've got so much backers, we've got so many of these, the coastal prairies are becoming brush fields.
so the state parks are exempt from this discussion. They're written right into the language of this part, that there's an exemption for them. That just like there's an exemption for Sea Ranch. It's the private landowners and primarily Timber Cove that are significantly lacking. So the other part I forgot to point out is that if we go the public works discussion, this doesn't do anything for the 100-foot defensible space. We can't use a public works project within that defensible space. So it doesn't accomplish part of what this whole thing was about, was getting landowners to manage their vegetation near their defensible space, which makes it safer for the Chief Nichols to come and protect your houses in a fire.
So as Beth and Marty put out, I was made aware of this process this morning. So we're a little bit, I'll just put it out there, we're way behind the power curve. So as Supervisor Hopkins can attest to, and so many folks that I've worked with here in the county, we need to have less hurdles to get over rather than more hurdles. So I'm concerned in the preliminary read I've had through this, that to the point about public works projects, that may seem like an end around or a way to get us through the end zone where we want to be. But I'm also very concerned about some unforeseen downstream consequences. And to Matt's point, one is that it doesn't allow for work in that defensible space because it's mandated by the state of California underneath Public Resources Code 4291. So that would eliminate that opportunity around within that 100 feet from the homes. And then also with the changing budget realities in not only the state, but the federal government and perhaps the county government, the resources that have been here in the last handful of years, I don't see those continuing indefinitely. So at that point in time, a public works project in state government and I believe county government as well triggers a prevailing wage conversation, which takes a project that might have been a reasonable project cost-wise and takes it to a point where now a community like Timber Cove, Munez Ranches, and the surrounding communities do not have that ability to bring resources to bear to complete that project. So I reached out to Matt today. My forester staff wasn't immediately available today as it's just didn't line up. So I understand this is going to a vote on the 4th. But my concern is that we go into this in a measured and calculated approach and make sure that we don't inadvertently add another layer of potential bureaucracy or hurdles that we have to overcome. As I noticed here in the staff recommendation, we have this section that's specific to the coastal plan, the local coastal plan. And the conversation was to use the county-wide public safety element as the tool to approach that. I think that you want to be careful because the Coastal Commission is dealing with a specific section of territory out here on the coast, whereas the public safety element is a county-wide document. And that as well is under update. And our land use planning division has been engaged in that process. And I'd like to see that come to fruition before we put that square peg potentially in this round hole to make something work in short order. So long story long, I'm very concerned that I think at a bare minimum, we leave it as is, if that's the way it's got to be for this round, just to make sure we don't complicate things. But perhaps in the timeline that we have, some of our resource management staff from not only the unit, but also North Region that are attached to so many of these critical fuels projects have a chance to weigh in and address the nuances of the hurdles that the Coastal Commission has in place for the work that's done out here on the coast, but also what the end state is for the revision to the local coast plan. Is it truly to do defensible space work around homes, or is it to get us into that landscape level, more resilient environment that we're all looking for in the end?
Sure, if I may. I have a proposal, which is that we don't actually make a final vote on this on April 4th. I mean, what I'm sort of hearing is that, we have concerns from the ag community around fencing. We have, concerns from our fire subject matter experts. And, I did speak to one of my colleagues on the board who certainly seemed open to extending the timeline. I mean, this has been such a long process that to rush it over the finish line with a few critical elements still unresolved seems very foolhardy. And so I guess my request would be sort of for the chair and the MAC, if there is, a formal request from the Coast MAC that I can then share with the Board of Supervisors, and that maybe someone from the MAC can share with the Board of Supervisors. Even if you just reached out even informally to my colleagues, I think that could be very helpful. You've got great working relationships with all of us. And so I think that just putting a little bit of pressure to slow this down would be really, really helpful at this point in time. And I also want to say, I also have this request from Ruth Birch, who's like, how can you possibly have well ordinance and local coastal plan on the same day, which I kind of agree on. There's a lot going on for the environmental advocates as well, so.
Would you like a motion to that effect?
Well, this one.
Much as we can tonight.
Yes,
But
yes.
but I'm just saying that I don't feel like I can go in and, I mean, we could work, like crazy in the next couple of weeks to come up with some language that I then propose from the dais, but that's not the best way to make policy. I would love to be able to bring it back through staff and to make sure that there's an opportunity for the public to vet it before we just wordsmith from the dais.
The other part of this is the Board of Forestry is taking this topic up next Wednesday. And what you do here may completely get thrown out the door by the Board of Forestry in the next couple of months.
So taking it as a coastal zone specifically?
They are specifically going to talk about coastal zone. Primarily, right now, it's going to be about treatments that are allowed in a harvest plan. But the hope is to start having this conversation about using exemptions inside the coastal zone. So whatever you all decide, I mean, if this moves forward next week, you could be committing for next month. You may be jumping the gun.
I wanted to also make a clarification, maybe to help folks out here. A local coastal program.
Could you sum up to the,
You don't
because
mind.
this is being recorded.
Yeah, and this may help people understand. A local coastal program has two parts. So you have the plan, and that's the part we're working on now. And then that plan later, that gets certified by the Coastal Commission. That plan later gets interpreted into ordinances, or basically policies, enforceable zoning codes. So the difficulty, and why we've been here since 2015, part of the problem has been, is that the county chose to bifurcate the process. Most counties, when they do a large update, do the ordinances and the plans simultaneously. That way people aren't hanging and debating every single word of the plan, because they actually see how it's interpreted in the ordinances. The problem with the way that we're doing it, and why stakeholders have become so engaged, and why this has taken so long, is that we're not really sure how this is going to be interpreted into an ordinance. This is plan language. So we are wordsmithing so carefully so that we can avoid negative interpretations when it comes to enforceable ordinances. So a big part of the problem, and it's not the public's fault, and it's not the stakeholders' fault, and it's not the county's fault. It's just that they chose, which is permissible under the Coastal Act. It's just not the most desirable way to do it when you have an update of this scale. So this is part of the problem. And when you're talking about these very important things that are happening that are going to influence the ordinance language, the problem is that the plan will already be certified. The language will already be there. So I just kind of wanted to explain that part of the process to everybody who may not be familiar with how this is being done.
And I think that you're completely spot on. And the thing that I was just added, that's why I said, well, I know what the intent was, but I don't know what the implementation is going to be. And so that's why having absolute clarity in the language is so critical, because we can come in with one great intent. And then when staff actually interprets it and implements it, it can be the polar opposite if we're not clear, right, of what we actually intended. So staff may be intending to create a simplified process, but then they're relying on a $500,000 plan that has to be updated every 10 years. And there's no ability to actually implement basic defensible space around your home without getting a CDP, which was not the intent.
So is this still about the
Yeah.
fire? Okay, go ahead.
As a. Please come to the podium.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I hear you.
Sorry, Margaret.
That's okay.
So we can hear you.
I really respect and agree with taking the time to do it properly. But the reality is, as a homeowner, we are now going into a summer, which has had a lot of water happening. And so there's going to be a lot of growth. And I am stuck with a ridiculous permitting process in order to do what I need to do to protect my home. And so what I would like to see is work on something that deals with the immediacy of the problem, at the same time dovetails with the longer term situation, so that we can do things appropriately rather than below the radar.
Is there any other comment about the fire fuel management? Before we move on, and I guess the next one is somewhat related, which is which we had a discussion of the.
Just one last deal to time the Supervisor Hopkins ask is that this is so critical because the state parks properties to Matt's point are exempt. Sea Ranch is exempt. And so we are doing great work with the state parks at Fort Ross and Salt Point. Sea Ranch has done amazing work up north. But I'm very concerned about Timber Cove and the surrounding communities, Munez Ranch. But we got very lucky during the Myers fire, right? It wanted to burn to Munez, and it was some heroic action by the firefighters out there, including Chief Baxman from Monte Rio and our resources out there that kept that fire on the west side of Myers Grade. But that wasn't necessarily going to be the case, right? So it wanted to go into Munez, and then the winds shifted on us. And it wanted to go up into Timber Cove proper. So this is near and dear to my heart that we need to make sure that we do this right. So that we bring those resources and that opportunity to the coast to be able to protect those communities.
Thank you.
And if the state ever comes up with fire safe standards for housing, just in an effort to sort of reduce insurance premiums or actually extend insurance to places that are currently uninsurable, you're not going to be able to actually meet those criteria. I mean, the insurance commissioner has been talking about that for years, so I'm still waiting to see if that will ever actually happen. But if it does, it would be ironic if your own LCP prohibits you from making critical protections to your homes in order to be able to get insurance. Thank you guys so much for making the drive out here, by the way, from down here. I know it's a long drive for you to.
Did you want to talk about the forest and woodlands or the fire fuel? Okay, go ahead.
I'm on the Timber Cove Fire Protection District Board. I'm Carolyn Abst. And we have a chipper program. We got a chipper, we got a grant. We had it going. We had to do everything according to permits, and it all died there because we couldn't get permits. And it's crazy. It's crazed because they're trying hard. The other thing is you got to be out there and listen to the chainsaws of people taking care of their stuff, ready to be turned in. One neighbor was turned in and they had a $10,000 charge for cutting down a dead tree. And Linda knows about that, and it was reversed eventually, but it's a problem, and we all want to do the right thing.
Okay. That was fascinating. The preservation of non-commercial forest. I think we sort of discussed that.
I'm wondering if there's a definition problem, conflicting with state definitions. Is that?
That was a reluctant side.
So you have public resources code definitions. There are legal definitions that this is kind of skirting around. I would say follow the public resources code and not create new definitions, but that's just me. If you're gonna go with non-commercial, there isn't an acre of land that is under timber that is non-commercial. Legally, there's no way to define that because I can sell a quart of firewood off of any piece of forest land in this county. So if you're gonna do something like that, the proper term would probably be non-industrial forest landowner, which has a legal definition, the forest practice rules. However, I don't think it really matters if you're an industrial forest landowner or a non-industrial forest landowner, or you own an acre of forest land. We're all connected at this point. And to basically eliminate two landowners because they're an industrial forest landowner from being able to help with defensible space and fuel breaks and everything else. That's kind of scary, especially when one of them surrounds one of the communities that we're trying to really look at defending. So if we're going to start excluding people from this language, be aware of the ramifications of that.
Okay. Yep.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
So similar point, if we were to look into language, let's not once again nitpick and just do forest and woodland. When I look out and I see these coastal prairies that no longer have any grazing populations, what are we to call them? Are they woodland? Are they an early cereal brush field? But I think we should tackle them both if we want to nail this.
That's the next category.
Okay.
Section D, when it's talking about the definitions, when we talk about OSRC -700, it talks about restocking when trees are removed. So, removal of native trees and fragmentation of woodlands and forests shall be minimized. Any trees removed shall, and that's a very important legal word, shall be replaced, preferably at a site greater than a 1-to-1 ratio. So when we're talking about fuels reduction projects, if we're replacing the tree we just cut down, we're not removing that threat. So that would be a very concerning section to stay in that final document, just because there are times where we do need to remove the overstocking on a certain piece of land, and if we're obligated under a shall replace, then that's counterproductive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Anything else on that item? Onshore facilities related to wind energy and seabed mining.
I'll start a comment. Of course, we don't want industrial facilities in Bodega Bay. But we also want to be a part of the solution for alternative energy. This is a real hard thing. There's a question of whether it's they can piggyback on the oil facilities ordinance. I think that's a legal question that lawyers, judges perhaps will answer. It's a tough balance to find. I think Permit Sonoma takes the position that it's not going to happen here. And that's a little uncomfortable. I just start with that.
See, is there, maybe I can show my first 2 slides, so since we're on this topic anyways,
Okay.
or Richard Charter gave me a big poster. Pardon me?
I have your slides and I can just put them up.
Okay.
You can do, yeah. you
Yeah,
can
I
do it.
gave him a PowerPoint. Yeah, I just want to say that we've gone through a pretty extensive public process at the Planning Commission. And was kind of feeling, okay, we weren't at perfection. There was a lot of different things that we still needed to work out. And then these policy papers were released that I felt presented a lot of new information that hadn't been vetted. And also maybe didn't necessarily properly or accurately reflect the facts that we are dealing with. I mean, the purpose of a local coastal plan is to deal with emerging issues. And offshore wind and offshore sea mining is an emerging issue. And unfortunately, the choices that were provided in this policy option is asking us to choose between what was discussed at the Planning Commission or a policy B or a policy C, when in reality, we kind of need to look at all of them. To say this isn't going to happen here is not based in fact. I mean, if we look at, I mean, these are what's presented at offshore wind, BOEM conferences that they're holding all the time. There'll be one next week, actually, run by Senator McGuire, and that's going to be at the Senate, and that's actually available for the public to particularly listen to. I mean, these are images of the cables that they want to, that they're already planning or thinking about putting in. And so to say, you know, a lot of these offshore wind companies, even though they have these wonderful names like Equinor, they're owned by oil companies. Statoil owns Equinor. And so, you know, they've laid 18,000 miles of underground pipes and cables in the Gulf alone. I mean, laying cables is not an obstacle for them. And how they come on shore or where they may do this, and this is not about, let's not consider offshore wind as an option, right? We're all trying to look for a climate solution. This is about maintaining local control over what happens and how it happens and how big it happens. And so that's what people that are concerned about the fact that it's primarily large oil companies who don't have a really good record that are basically taking these leases. And the fact that, yes, maybe the lease now is in Humboldt and Morro Bay, but there's plans for them in Del Norte County. I mean, we're Bodega Bay, right? You know, so, and we also have the largest plateau outside our coast. So we could be desirable in the future. So it's important that we look at, this is the time to do it in our local coastal plan, that we look at a way that with all this pressure, state and federal pressure to develop these types of projects, that we maintain some kind of local control.
And so this is, and so we, at the planning commission, if anybody was there and attending that meeting, one of the things that we most certainly, and this is why I've asked Dick Ogg to be here, is that we would not have any kind of, and you can see, these are the maps of the cables, and if you go to the next slide, you'll actually kind of see what a substation would look like for support of transmission of that energy. So what we want to make sure of, first and foremost, is that we don't have that in any of our areas zoned commercial fishing. And that's what was decided at the planning commission process. But it was also the intent of the planning commission that the residents of Sonoma County would have local control to protect the entire coast. So it's not these policy options presented, certainly not saying that this isn't something we have to worry about at all, or that this only is symbolic. Today, actually, March 16, the ISA, which is the International Seafloor Association, or whatever they're called, which is the UN body for determining how undersea or deep sea mining would occur, is actually meeting today to try to set up, you know, the possibilities and regulations. I mean, this is the reality of our future, and we need our local coastal plan to not just be about protecting us now, but protecting us into the future. And we need to advocate for local control there. So it's not the choices that were presented, and those two policy options about the amendment are really poorly worded. They're very confusing. And we just need to kind of reflect what was done at the planning commission, which was about how do we get local control on this issue? How do we protect our commercial fishermen? And Dick, you can maybe speak to the reality of this, so I don't just seem like an alarmist. I mean, I don't even have a position yet on offshore wind. I'm hoping that it's developed on a smaller scale, and we have to understand that what they want to do here are floating, and that the only real examples they have are ones that are actually attached to the ground. So the type of technology that they want to introduce on the Pacific coast is experimental at best, and the impacts haven't really been fully known. And so, Dick, is there anything that you
Well,
want to add?
the other thing to consider is that they really have not taken and looked at the overall projects in general. I mean, the ones that they do have, the floating ones that they do have, are very small. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's some in Norway. The projects that they're looking at now are roughly 300 feet high. And they're triangular bases. And if one thinks about what we just went through recently with the big, you know, ocean conditions that we have, as I've been in the electrical field for over 40 years. So, you know, my base understanding of this is transmission and distribution, and I've done that for years. So understanding how the electrical systems will work, how they integrate together, how you set up transmission lines, and what you can do is, it's just beyond my imagination that they actually think that this would actually live through situations that we have in the water now. I'm in there, I'm on the water every day, every time we have a chance to be there. And there's no way to predict these things. There's no way to predict when you get these big swallows. There's no way to support these devices that, you know, just are, it is a problem. And there is no real mechanism to protect us on the shorelines. So we need to think about our community and what kind of impact this will have, you know. And the what I have seen and what we've been working with, I'm on a bunch of offshore wind committees. We can make these decisions and we can say they're not going to happen, but it happens. They're doing it and they're going to do it. So we need to be strong here as a group and protect this area and make sure that we don't have these problems just dropped on us and they just say, hey, you know, you were gonna put a nuclear plant here. There's got to be a path in. There's an easy way in. We'll just travel down to Malo. The grid's right, you know, down the street from there. So we need to really be prepared for this. So you know, I'm not one to, Supervisor Hopkins would be able to understand the policy. I mean, I'm not a policy person. I'm a fisherman, but I can see what's happening. You know, and I'm dealing with this every day. So I mean, we just as a group, we've really got to think about this. Because I'll just use the the dams for an example. Okay, hydroelectric power, that was the answer. You know, that was going to solve all our problems. And now look what's happened. You know, they're taking them down. You know, we have to think about the unintended consequences. So be prepared, be ready, because it's an issue that's coming.
I guess what we would really like to see in the local coastal plan is just the opportunity for some kind of local government control on any sort of decision about what offshore wind would look like, how it would work, where it would be, if it could be, what the impacts are to our commercial fishing industry, which is the heart of our coast. What would the impact be to our natural environment? I mean, we have outside of our coast one of the most important currents, the California current, and preliminary studies, when you have these large turbines turning and changing the wind cycle, what is that going to do to our offshore current, which is life sustaining, not just for our area, but for the whole Eastern Pacific? There's a lot that needs to be studied, and we just don't want to lose the opportunity in the local coastal plan to have a voice.
That's Scott.
Is it true the coastal commission could simply say this is the greater good and it's going to happen?
It is true that they have that capability, but at least, you know, we would have a voice first and it would become a debate, it would become an issue, it would become an argument. And like anything else in front of the commission, there would be a discussion and a vote.
So is the key thing to ensure that our voice is front and center in any part of this?
Yes.
Recognizing that if indeed it were to happen, that it would have our great input.
Yes. It would require a vote.
Is there, I was just gonna ask that, is there a voter, is there a potential for, you know, voting and thinking about, you know, asking the public, you know, their opinion and I mean, is there that option?
Well, I think that was the intent of the planning commission. The problem with, I don't want to get too technical on you, the problem with the planning commission was they thought that they could just amend the existing ordinance that dealt with offshore oil. The problem with that was that that ordinance was a result of a vote. And you cannot legally change an ordinance that was already voted upon. So the alternative then is to create prohibitions, and then to amend a prohibition, it would be a vote to overturn that prohibition. And that way, anybody who was interested in developing that kind of project would actually have to appeal to the voters of Sonoma County to say, you know, which might make them refine their proposition a little bit and give the people of Sonoma County the power to say, okay, there's a prohibition, but for this project, we might consider overturning that because this would benefit or provide a clean source. So it's not closing to offshore wind, it's prohibiting it unless the people approve.
So it's forcing a dialogue.
Exactly. But the language that's currently written is extremely confusing, and it doesn't make that clear to people. When it says prohibit, amend this policy, it doesn't make clear that the policy is the prohibition. I just think, Linda, I could use a little tweaking, and I don't think there should be a choice, because by saying it's B or C, you're taking away what the planning commission put in as a protection for commercial fishing.
I thought it was
commercial
B and C.
fishing.
I thought we would be looking for B and C and the original language as well. So there
We
would be
would look
basically
for
three different policies,
A,
one
B,
the
and C.
existing, and then the
Yeah.
other, the next to prohibit facilities, and then the next to prohibit facilities that for the offshore mining piece.
Yes.
That would be, and so we can, I'll help with you on just rewording the policy to make it clearer, but that's what we would be looking for, right? Original
B,
plus B and
Yeah,
plus.
or planning commission plus.
Right.
Yeah. So thank you.
Awesome. Good conversation. So, sea otters.
Yeah. It seems to me that this is mixing up means and ends, that the end that this is talking about is restoration of health. And reintroducing sea otters is one of the possible mechanisms for revitalizing the health. And so raising sea otter reintroduction to the subject heading and to of the topic, I think is confusing the means and the ends, because what we're after is kelp restoration. And I know from, as Marty pointed out in my introduction, I'm on the board of the Cordell Marine Sanctuary Foundation. And I hang out, I'm a finance person, but because they have to have one, but it's mostly marine, marine scientists. And this topic has come up, as you might imagine, and it's far from a slam dunk that reintroducing sea otters is the answer to kelp restoration.
So can I provide a little context
Yeah.
for this? Okay. So, so this is just simply the subject for the Board of Supervisors meeting. It's
Okay.
not actually like gonna be in the LCP as
Okay.
sea otter reintroduction. Sea otter reintroduction will actually be just inserted as a policy in a sort of broader section about marine ecosystem protection and restoration. And this actually came up because just, I think it was last August, that there was a 300-page study published by National Fish and Wildlife, specifically about reintroduction in Northern California and coastal Oregon. And so that actually sort of highlighted the benefits. And right now, actively, there are actually a number of subgroups of scientists who are working on feasibility, economics, and sort of actually actively trying to identify sites in Northern California to do this. And actually, we are working with local tribal leaders and our congressman to host a summit on this in May, which we reached out to think about, because the fishing community is sort of the sort of major concern, right? Sort of what are the impacts? What is sort of you know, each otter eat? What are their patterns? Like, how, you know, how can the fisheries potentially be impacted? But this, even though sea otter reintroduction was the headline of this, that's just because it's new since the Planning Commission, not because we're going to have like a whole chapter on sea otters in the LCP, as cute as they are.
I have a question, and this is of Dick on. I was under the impression from some people that I know that vote, I'm a landlubber, I look at the water, I'm not going on. Don't we have sea otters?
Really.
River.
Yes, there's river otters.
Okay.
We've actually seen some multiple years,
Okay.
you know, but no, there's not actually sea otters. Okay.
Thank you.
There's an occasional mail that will like float up and people will get pictures, or it was actually off of, I think Gleason Beach, someone sent me a picture recently, and then, and has also been cited in the Bodega Bay area, but it's always just like a random drift and then they go back.
Yeah.
Yeah. But not a sort of
There
population
are-
that's actually
So
resident.
is this plan to like protect the ecosystem in general and not just, we're just not talking about the otter, right?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah. So it's actually in the section that also talks about sort of stewardship of our kelp resources. And actually this also, even though it's called sea otter, also introduces the concept of prohibiting kelp harvesting until a point that our kelp sort of is actually sustainable, which it is not currently.
So the kelp harvesting, that's live kelp in the water, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Janie? did you-
I had a question as to whether there's any research at BML on sea otter. Are they involved in the reintroduction or?
They have been invited to the summit, and they've actually been actively working on abalone restoration,
Yes,
which is
that I
also
know.
another interesting conversation, because otters can eat abalone, but they also have higher populations of abalone in areas that have resident otters because there's a beneficial impacts on the kelp ecosystem. So it's all very complicated.
Yeah, that's
but-
why I asked the question.
Yeah.
I knew some people doing research on the red abalone, and I know that the otters love that. There's all kinds of people.
Yeah, but there's a guy at Sonoma State who specializes in this as well and has worked in Elkhorn Slough where they successfully reintroduced otters.
So that's great. That was my only point of this, and you've answered it.
It's a really good point, though. It's like, we're not just having a chapter on sea otters. It's folded into a whole other thing about marine.
See?
If I could make a recommendation as to something to include in that sea otter policy, what I don't see specifically laid out, although you're talking about what's just happened in Oregon and these other papers, are
that included in this consideration was they would look at other areas where sea otters were introduced and any of the issues or problems that were raised there. For example, in one area in Alaska where they reintroduced sea otters, they ended up having to cull them because their population got too large, which is something we don't want to open up sea otter hunting again. But I think it's important that there be specific language in there about including that in any consideration. And then, success stories or issues in other areas of reintroduction. And if we're truly talking about kelp restoration, one of the most important things, because sea otters will not eat barren urchin. They only eat healthy urchin. They only eat healthy urchin, but what will eat barren urchin are sunstars. And that's what we have lost completely in practically the whole Pacific Northwest. So it'd be nice to see some kind of thing about reintroduction of sunstars specifically. And then the last thing is there doesn't seem to be a distinction between commercial and recreational harvesting when you're talking about harvesting seaweed. And that's a pretty big distinction.
I thought that there sort of was, for
Maybe I didn't read it.
individual.
I didn't see
Yeah.
that either.
I felt that there was something.
I think that there are companies that are actually harvesting the resource north here. And I know that, in the MPA meeting that I was in, the tribal, I mean, they were absolutely against that, they were fighting that tooth and nail. So, I mean, I don't know that there's any, you can specifically say that you and I can go out and grab a bunch of,
Well, recreationally, you're allowed
But-
to grab up to 10.
but my point is that you and I could go out and grab a bunch and turn around and sell it. And is that control? Because that is an impact. And it's something we really need to consider. And how do you word that?
Yeah, I'm not sure the right way to do it, but I just felt like there needed to be some kind of further discussion about the different types of harvesting when you're looking at possibly closing areas.
You're right, it actually says, scientific research was the exemption, not personal, but I think that's really good point. And also there's a, historic, cultural, indigenous, tribal practices as well that I think should be probably called out in the section as well. And I like the sea stars, support, it could be a program, support reintroduction or, help beneficial sea star rehabilitation, maybe it's something the Marine Lab at some point does.
And that comes back to your point, because the Marine Lab right now is doing studies with bat stars, looking at their possibilities of regeneration. And the only place on the Pacific West Coast that's actually studying regeneration of sea stars, and they're actually, or sun stars, and they're actually finding that they're climate resilient as well, which is pretty good news too, is what's called white. What's the name of the lab on the Washington coast?
Right.
Yeah, Bright Harbor, thank you.
Yeah.
So that is the only place doing that, but it'd be really wonderful to find funding to do that locally here with the data marine lab.
So, I imagine there's some comments on the site specific uses one, so I want to get onto that.
Okay.
So, okay, site specific uses, who would like to start that?
Could I make a suggestion? about
Yeah.
the meeting?
Yeah,
This is the first meeting we've had in person. And hopefully the next meeting will be hybrid. And this meeting is being recorded for the people who couldn't come tonight. And in the future, when we have hybrid meetings, it's going to be important that people come to the podium to speak. So that people who are here can hear you. And so that's my nosy comment.
Okay, so it is now 7:45, so I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. So, let's go ahead and try to get as much as we can on the site specific, and I know there's some people who want to make a motion about a letter that we would sign, so I want to make sure we leave save time for that as well. So, let's try to get as much as we can in about the site specific uses for now. So who would like to start there? Okay, so Marty, go ahead. So we're just with this,
It works here.
you're good there.
Because
Oh, I am?
Yes.
okay.
It's just the C basically is how it works.
Okay. I'm ecstatic about permit Sonoma suggestions about taking on all of these issues. And those of you who attended previous MAC meetings know, I think this perpetuates something that was put in the local coastal plan 40 years ago. And these sites are all regulated by Permit Sonoma and the Coastal Commission anyway. And as is called out in the discussion part of this document, many of these places haven't developed the way the people in 1980 thought they might develop. And it's redundant to have them be in here. So I was really pleased to see Permit Sonoma recommending an option to take them all out. And I personally would encourage the Board of Supervisors to agree to that.
Scott?
I'll add to that. I also agree with taking them all out. Timber Cove is particularly represented. I think every business is named. And it frankly, it feels discriminatory. And I'll just leave it there.
Joe?
When I first heard about this, I was very concerned because Bridgehaven is part of the Jenner community, and it sounded to me like it was opening up language that was supporting a lot of development there. Bridgehaven is actually a trailer park, and it's one of the very few places on our part of the coast where people who have very little money can afford to live. They've been there for decades, some of them, and I thought that this taking it out was like removing protection. But actually, when I talked to Scott and I actually did some research, what it says, that the language that they're removing calls it Bridgehaven Resort. It is not a resort. But if you leave that language in, it kind of opens the door for someday in the future for it to be a resort. So I'm very happy now to take that language out, let it just be under the purview of the general coastal oversight and the whole permit process. And I think it actually protects Bridgehaven to take it out rather than, as I said, my first concern was that I thought it was opening up Bridgehaven to development, but I feel now that it is actually eliminating language that would invite development. So.
Margaret?
Thank you.
I'm Margaret Graham, and I'm the person who actually requested the removal of the policies that allude to a specific business. I have presented reasoning why to the Planning Commission, to PRMD, to the Board of Supervisors consideration, and explained all of that. In this venue, I'm really curious to hear the reasons why people are against. They want to keep that in, because I don't understand it. And so, and I wonder whether the information that is out there who doesn't agree with it is incorrect or correct. So that's what I'm curious about here, to hear the dissension to it.
Is there anybody else who would like to comment?
I have a slide on there.
Okay, Leo, can you pull up?
I'm just doing it
slide?
piecemeal. I don't mind.
Yeah.
If no one else has
Yeah.
anything else to say.
It seems like there's no opposition to.
Well, I think he has a point
Oh,
on
okay.
a specific one. Go ahead.
Could we bring up that slide? And this might help answer some of your questions. And I don't, the Planning Commission made the recommendation to maintain those site-specific policies. And it was based on a historical context and significance of those policies. Their decision to maintain those policies was a result of fact-based balanced hearings, public and expert input, and not so much lobbying by special interests with wishes to develop those sites. I think what's really important to understand is that site-specific policies are more protective than the CDP process. At best, the CDP process can mitigate a project, but it can't stop it. So the original planners for certain sites, and I understand that some of these present issues now, but to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, I think you, without knowing the historical context, and these are not anti a business, these are parcel specific based on the resources at that specific parcel. So these are not anti a particular business. They've been trained that way by people who want to develop in certain parcels that have restrictions on them. I think it's important to understand when you say all the Bridge Haven, I mean, maybe there needs to be some refining in the terminology of what it's called, and I agree with you. Basically, what it's not about takings that should not be introduced by permit Sonoma. The Ocean Cove piece, I don't think they even spoke to the folks at Ocean Cove about that. But this idea that we get rid of them all without a more careful vetting of what their historical context is or what parcels they protect, rather than selectively going through them and possibly refining them so that they are protected. Because just relying, as Marty is saying, on the zoning process or the ordinance is not as protective as these original. That's why they made them site-specific policies. And anything that is west, development west of Highway 1, any type of CDP that would be applied for would have a public access component to it. That's the coastal act. That's not Sonoma County. So that is not something specific to Bridgehaven or discriminatory towards Bridgehaven. That would be any development west of the Highway 1. So their justification for removal was often no permit records to provide examples. Basically, that's pretty stagnant, and it kind of fails to ensure future protections of these sites just because a permit hadn't been applied for. And it's interesting that the justification is used several times, yet when it comes to one of the most controversial of these sites, they don't use that. They use a different one. They also talk about the fact that there are terms such as modest, and because the term modest is vague, it justifies the removal of that entire policy. My thing is, we need to clarify these terms, and in fact, the permit Sonoma itself, in some of their current proposals, if you even look at the one for campgrounds, they actually propose modest development. They're using the term in their new policies that they're presenting in these policy papers, while at the same time using it as justification to throw out others. Believe me, if we were going on vagary of terms in this newest local coastal plan, and they were saying to get rid of those vague terms, we would be throwing out over a quarter of this document. There is a lot of examples. So it should not be used as a justification to get rid of the site-specific policy. Rather, what I'm calling for is, rather than just voting blankly on removing these policies without knowing their historical context, without really understanding how they are more protective than a CDP process, that we rather pull back here and look at, can we review these policies one by one? Or can we go with the planning commission recommendation, which was vetted, and then work this out when it gets to the ordinance process?
So,
But I personally do not support, and nor do a lot of people that have worked to protect this coast, or who were the original people that put these site-specific policies in place, do not support the coastal MAC's decision to actually just get rid of all of them.
so can I ask you a question, Steve? So this is about, looks like on this list is about no less than 20 site-specific uses.
And that's the thing, they've only pulled certain examples, because there are site-specific policies throughout the whole coastal zone.
Okay.
So that's what's confusing to me too. I just feel like this policy paper doesn't accurately reflect what was vetted at the commission.
So the point of this policy option to remove just these specific mentions?
No, it's to remove all of them,
Any, so even if it's not mentioned here,
yes.
and because this is in one section, this is CLU-5, all those options.
Yeah.
So with respect to items which are not in that section, I mean, I guess you might be would that be, are all of those going to be removed, or is it just in this section that we're talking about?
It shouldn't be all of them, but if there are ones that are missing, that is definitely something that I can bring
Well,
up
you can
with
very
staff.
clearly what they say in this policy paper, they say, here are some examples.
Okay.
And they pick the most controversial ones where there have been
Right.
basically people had cited, and they're using as a justification to get rid of all of them. And
So-
I think that's a sweeping move in which you could actually be taking away protections that have long been in place and had a justification for existing. And it's much better to go back and look at these site by site. That's my recommendation, and I'm just nervous about your recommendation that I feel you're basing on the fact that the CDP process would be as protected, and it's not.
Okay, but from my perspective, there are some of these which kind of clearly don't make sense.
They deserve further discussion, which is why going with the planning commission's recommendation and your recommendation to remove all site-specific policies, not just the ones mentioned here, it is problematic. And I recommend that that decision be pulled back until we've had a chance to review all of the site-specific policies and vet them more carefully. That's
So
just.
let me go to,
Real quick, I attended the planning commission discussion when they took this up, and they had much the same discussion we're having. They were divided. And it was only, I think it was a 2-3 vote, and the deciding vote was really in deference to the District 5 commissioner, I felt. It wasn't a clear-cut decision on their part.
I think part of that, Scott, is because Eric Conashopper was a part of putting these site-specific policies in place, and that's why they deferred to him, because he had a firm understanding of why they were put in place, and originally. And so it wasn't so much that there was a disagreement, but maybe a lack of knowledge as to the importance of these site-specific policies, which is why they deferred to Eric. Not so much because there was a conflict about whether they thought they should be in there or not.
Robbie?
So this question of historical context is really important. Because as you said, Commissioner Koenigshofer referred to it in the planning commission hearings about this, and it was important to him. So what I have provided to everybody, including the planning commission, is the formal copy of that historical document. It was obtained from the Coastal Commission files, and it's the 1980 version of the plan for recreational development. So this is a formal document that explains the historical context of why these were brought about. And for example, the one for Timber Cove Inn, this limit on expansion was because a couple of people within the community didn't like the way that the inn was being managed. You can read the report. And so for that reason, this policy was put in place. Now, and this is where I have a problem with it being having businesses referred to. So if this policy was put in place by the ownership to protect the community against the bad management and ownership of Timber Cove Inn in 1980, why should that continue to be held against whoever owns it now and whoever is managing it? And that's why I think that this is land use. And I understand the importance of having regulations about what the land is able to do. And I am not questioning this at all. The CEQA and all of that is there for any development, absolutely. But for it to be a business-specific thing that is based in something that was 50 years ago for an organization and ownership there, that is completely wrong. And that's why I think it should be any reference to any business should not be right. This is land use, not business specific. It's like saying I as an individual can't do what I want to do on my piece of land because somebody else did something that somebody didn't like 40 years ago. So that's.
I don't want to start an issue. I think it's important to understand that story of it being about a grudge against a certain manager. I think Bill Corrigan was rolling over in his grave. He was a much bigger man than that. That parcel where the expansion
could have occurred is an area of biological significance. It provides access to the second smallest state park on the California coast. It's provides a view shed. There were many reasons to protect that parcel, separate from the business of Timber Cove. So I'm not sure what historical document you're speaking of, but I know from the people that were a part of protecting that parcel that it wasn't about a grudge against the owner. And I do not like that you are using that as a justification. That parcel was protected for other reasons. The history isn't only the original history, it's everything
So-
we've learned about that
So
parcel.
I want to, because it is 8 o'clock now, so I really want, I know that some of the MAC members wanted to make a motion. So Jill, did you?
Yeah, I'd like to move that we send a letter to Supervisor Hopkins supporting her delaying and putting off for at least 90 days the consideration of the LCP in order for there to be further input from stakeholders and the public.
I second that motion.
Scott, you want to?
We're opening up more time to discuss. And how will we discuss it so that it's productive?
Well, I think the question is, how do we propose to suggest to Linda that the Board of Supervisors direct that conversation in such a way that it's going to be productive? It's not the MAC
No, of course,
that needs to hear all this.
and I'm not opposed to the extension. I just know we've been here before, and here we are. And let's try to get it right.
Right.
And
that's exactly the point. We want it to be right. I echo Supervisor Hopkins' sentiments. I think that there's still a lot of loose ends that need to be tied up. April 4th is way too soon to tie it up in a way that we're gonna have to live with this LCP for 20 years, 30 years. So we better get it right now.
well,
To rush it to April 4th, when there's still so much uncertainty, would be foolhardy, in my opinion.
and I would say that there are some ends that need to be tied up, and there are some issues about which the public will disagree. And that's why we pay the Board of Supervisors the big bucks.
So I suppose the question is, and maybe you can answer this. Is the Board of Supervisors the best place for the community to bring these, like this discussion that we've had here? Should we go on April 4th? Should folks, there is the option of hybrid, so folks can do Zoom comments there. Should our focus be directed there? And then this suggests to the Board of Supervisors that we need to have another Board of Supervisors meeting, or should it be some other form?
I actually think that's a very appropriate form, but I think that in addition to suggesting a delay, if there are any issues that came up here tonight that you feel like we should particularly focus on, I mean, for me, the vegetation management piece is absolutely critical, and clearly we don't have that right. And so, if there are any sort of issues that you feel like have been given inadequate attention, the ag enterprise was, one that came up as well, and the fencing. And I also just want to say one brief thing on the fencing, which is that I think that, there has been this fear that vineyards are going to overtake the coast in light of climate change. We have taken a strong stand that was actually begun in Marin County that would require a coastal development permit to do anything like that. But I think that part of the thinking in terms of the fencing was that, this was going to be sort of a cultivated area for wildlife exclusion, as opposed to thinking about it from a rancher's perspective. And so I think that that's also a really critical area to hone in. But if you were to formally, as the MAC, request for a delay and highlight a few issues that you feel like have been given inadequate attention, I think that would be really helpful. And I think that probably the right thing to do is to keep it on the calendar on April 4th. So there's another public opportunity for folks to comment, but then to delay the final decision because the language is not where we need it to be in order to go and vote on it on that day.
Okay, so I guess we have a motion on the floor, and so just for clarity's sake, in order to not have to wordsmith a letter here, I guess the options could be to either direct the chair, with me, to write a letter that would be general enough so that it wouldn't upset anybody on this with the obvious disagreements that we have here, but also specific enough that would point out some of these items. So I guess the question is that okay? Or
Amend my motion to direct the chair to write a letter to Linda for transmission to the Board of Supervisors that echoes the sentiments expressed by Linda and by the attendance there.
and does that work for you as well? Okay.
That absolutely works for me.
Okay, so is there any discussion on that as the motion as it is? Okay, so with respect to that, is that I'll go ahead and call vote.
Public comment.
Is there any comment about that topic?
We're just really grateful that you're advocating for time, whether we agree or disagree, or whether there's policies that need to be considered further. Thank you very much for advocating for that time.
Okay.
And I'd like to ask, my name is Melinda Paul and I'm a resident and I work here. My question is, are the specificity of the ones, are they included in all the ones we've discussed tonight or just a
I'm
few?
going to try to be limited in specificity because I don't think many of these, some of them I think there were a lot of commonality in the discussion we had here, but I'm going to try to be not so specific as to the actual content, but more that on the policy options that this body didn't think that they were ready yet, as opposed
So all the ones we discussed tonight?
Yes.
All of them. Okay, that's what I meant.
So unless, I don't think any of them were particularly happy with any of these. So I will go back through and as we look at I'll watch the video again.
We don't know about family farms, but
We did not talk about family farms, but
that's probably fine.
okay. All right, so with that being said, I'll go ahead and call the question is the motion as amended by Jill and seconded by Beth, all in favor? All opposed? Abstentions? Okay. So I'm gonna move forward with the letter and I will send around a version of that letter and forward it to the supervisor's office. Actually, I'll send it to all the supervisor's office.
And we'll get to see it.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
All right. It is now 8:10. So see,
Because this is an issue that's related to the local coastal plan and your next item, I was just, and I know time isn't an issue, if I could run through quickly so that we could include it as a topic for your letter, as one of the areas that was not in the policy papers, but is an unresolved part of the local coastal
right.
plan.
So the last item on our agenda, which we still have one more item on our agenda, is the vacation rental. The document that planning Permit Sonoma sent out about the coastal zone vacation rental ordinance. And that obviously has something to do with the LCP.
It's kind of a tie-in.
Yeah, so do you have the first slide on the vacation rental?
I do, I just closed.
Yeah, so I
I'll
do,
go through it quickly.
I have a long drive.
yeah,
I'm comfortable staying as long as it needs to be.
Yeah.
This is a good meeting.
okay,
You
so.
don't have as long a drive as some of them.
So,
Picturing a caravan, you all in a line going up.
Yeah.
so I do want to be, so, I mean, I think you understand that.
I'm gonna go through it much faster than I originally thought. I just felt like the language that was in this, introducing this ordinance or this possibility of business licenses came from a coastal commission memo. And if you don't mind putting that up, the problem with it was that it was only pieces of the memo that were very selective. And so it talked about how the commission recognizes vacation rentals as an important part of public access.
But unfortunately, that is not what the entire letter says. In that same letter, the commission also recognized that there were legitimate community concerns over potential adverse impacts associated with vacation rentals with respect to housing stock and affordability, community character, noise, and traffic. And the most important thing when the commission is working with the local community, developing a local coastal plan or developing an ordinance regarding vacation rentals, is that they want to include in that plan avoiding oversaturation of vacation rentals in any one neighborhood or locale. So that's direct language that was not in that introduction, but is in that memo. And the reason why I bring that forward is because that implies somehow that the Coastal Act protects vacation rentals. If we could do the next slide. What the Coastal Act protects is visitor serving amenities, right? Low cost visitor and recreational facilities. It does protect public access and it does protect coastal natural resources. And it's a matter on any development decision or any type of ordinance that you are balancing all three. But specifically the Coastal Act nor the Coastal Commission protect vacation rentals. I think that's a really important distinction. The next thing is the CCC in other areas of California, right? There have been ordinances up and down the California coast that have limited the total number of vacation rentals allowed within certain areas, either by neighborhood or by community, using a community-wide ratio. They've limited the types of housing that can be used as vacation rentals, like disallowing vacation rentals in affording housing context. They put limits on maximum vacation rental occupancy. They put limits on the amount of time a residential unit can be used as a vacation rental during a given period of time. They've also developed exclusion zones. Now, those are not bans, they're exclusion zones. And trust me, I've stayed in vacation rentals. I'm not against them, but I am about balancing them, you know, in a coastal area. So some examples on the next page, like Santa Cruz, and this was an ordinance that was passed in the coastal zone, right? That dealt with density. It prohibits new vacation rentals if vacation rentals exceed 20% of the residential use of any particular block, or if a vacation rental constitutes more than 15% of residential stock overhaul. In San Diego, they made the limit to be, it had to be capped at 1% of the city housing stock. In the city of Solano Beach, these are all coastal areas. They put permit short-term rentals in residential zones, but they specified a minimum stay of 7 days. I'm not proposing any of these, but what I am proposing is that in our LCP currently, and Linda, both you and Gary have promised to look at the density issue, and it's not that I don't trust you. I would just like to see it. We only have a program proposed in the local coastal plan, right? Currently, we haven't gotten to that ordinance stage. What you're talking about tonight is looking at something to do now as far as business licenses. But what I'm saying is, as we said, we have to deal with emerging issues and current issues, is that this is the current language. What I would like to see, and we'll do it on the next page, highlighted in yellow, so that you're actually really committing to this. I don't know if we can enlarge that, but just to completely, or, you know, to add these words to the local coastal plan, which are not controversial, which are part of the Coastal Commission's position, which have been done everywhere else in California, is that we simply add, right, that it's not just about performance standards, but that also we identify areas where high concentration of vacation rentals would impact environmentally sensitive habitat areas, water quality, and we add housing stock and affordability, community character, noise, traffic impacts, or coastal access, and develop land use policies to avoid these impacts. And so that is the only way that we can be guaranteed that density will be looked at here on the coast. If it's not in this plan, it's not going to be considered in the ordinance. I'm simply asking that we just add these words, so that will be a consideration when we have an ordinance in the future. And currently, what I'm hoping is that this business license isn't going to actually prevent having further discussion and a clear ordinance that looks at all of these issues about vacation rentals on the coast. I am not making a pro or con argument on the vacation rentals. I'm just saying that the language in the plan has to include this so that we include that in consideration for future ordinances.
Quick response. fully support that edit. I also actually would like to strike the word high or high concentration of vacation rentals. I think that just sort of makes it seem very extreme and just a concentration, leave it at that, and then we can determine sort of what constitutes high or medium or over concentrated or under concentrated. And I mean, this is extremely consistent with the conversations that we've been having in inland. And I in no way want the business license to take the place of this conversation. I think this conversation needs to be expedited insofar as we try to expedite anything through permits, no mind nowhere. But I will do my best, to get it as a priority when it comes to the implementation, development, and so fully support that. But the business license at least will allow us to reduce the noise impacts and be able to sort of kick problematic ones that repeatedly violate, sort of certain standards out of the program. It's not going to fix all of the problems. I totally acknowledge that, and we still need to have the policy conversation that we've had inland.
Yeah, it's just this idea that what Permit Sonoma has been putting out to the public is that the commission would only support performance standards, and that's not true. And that's not what's happened everywhere else in California. And if you are looking at density inland, all you're going to do is push everything out to the coast if you don't look at density at the coast too, where it's already a problem. And so thank you for just putting those words in there that say that will be a consideration when we come to the ordinance in the future.
Do you have a copy, or can you send me an email? If you guys put it in my binder right now.
Marty?
Yes, and I have no objection to adding these words, but I have a question for the chair. Have we gone on to the next topic, the vacation rental? Because I have things to say about
Yeah,
that
well,
vacation rental.
well, that is interesting because it's kind of fuzzy here. So I'm not exactly sure where the LCP discussion, so I'll stay with what we have.
Okay.
So, Carolyn. yes.
Well,
So-
you should go do the.
Yeah.
MAC panel.
Right, I know, did you have a comment about
This.
that? Okay, so I will get you next. I'm gonna let Marty speak first and then, so go ahead.
Ryan, sorry if I may interject, in terms of the item, like,
Yeah.
I think I can offer some context for like why this is here and
Oh, good.
what is going
Sure.
on, because this was something that I asked Permit Sonoma to put together in response to our last hearing about vacation rentals.
Okay.
Basically, what was happening was that they had ignored the coast, and regardless of what your perspective was, people didn't understand what they were proposing about the coast. They didn't understand when any of these things were supposed to happen, and they committed to coming back to this body. So we had been working with them on the River MAC's agenda for vacation rentals. And it became clear that they were planning to move forward some coast-related items the way that they had in the fall. So I said, you cannot put out this material to the River MAC, which we then have to postpone because of the flooding, but without also explaining clearly what is happening right now on the coast. And so then, this could have come in as correspondence or something else,
Yeah.
but I felt like we needed to include this in your official package so that you could choose to agendize it if it's problematic and have more of a conversation, but to also just show sort of where we are with this. So this document is really just trying to force Permit Sonoma to explain in closer to sort of plain English what's happening, because we're going to see these things mixed into the April 24th conversation about inland vacation rentals. And the way they've been handling the coast is just to sort of throw it in on the side, like, we've been talking to the Coastal Commission, we're doing some stuff now. And so this is just to explain that it's saying that they are trying to adjust the current LCP that's in place, not the proposed LCP that we just spent the last hour talking about. They want to update the current LCP to reflect that that vacation rentals exist, basically. They need to do that according to the Coastal Commission so that business licenses would be applied to the coast. So they're going to be talking about business licenses on April 24th. The process for inland is still different than the coast, but they will be moving forward business licenses with the hope of having it apply to both areas. But the track for the coast requires this happening simultaneously, the change to the local ordinance. And it will still have to go through coastal commission approval before they could do business licenses. So that's the context of what this document is trying to explain, as well as the fact that the complaint hotline that we're encouraging people to use at that point would also be available for the coast. It doesn't really speak to whether they're going to do that continued work or not. It doesn't speak to whether Permit Sonoma values that or not. We're going to have to advocate for that if that's something we think is important. But it's just trying to show sort of how, like, what small piece they're doing right now as part of this package that they're moving forward in April.
So, Leo, I understood that. I just wanted to make sure that going forward, the program language had something added to it. I understand something they're doing now. And the thing about.
Hey, see, I have the floor.
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say it'll help determine how many.
So hold this, let's let,
Sorry, Marty, I didn't see you. I'm sorry.
So Leo, I want to be sure I understand what you just said. Because when I saw this in our agenda packet, I called the person at Sea Ranch, who's the head of the vacation rental group, which is a group of 350 people who vacation rent their homes. And he didn't know anything about this, and he was still, and he is one of the most directed, fabulous researchers in the world. And he told me he only knows what happens because he routinely checks all the possible websites of every department in the county that could have anything to do with the vacation rental policy to see what has happened. Because the coast hasn't been communicated with in an adequate way, from my perspective. And so I want to be able to tell the people in my community whether they should attend that meeting on April 24th or not, and whether the things that are brought up in that meeting will apply to them. And responsible people want to obey the county, but they haven't received any information from the county. All those people who are paying their TOT taxes, and the county already knows who they are. They aren't being informed of what's happening, and if the discussion on the 24th is going to affect them immediately, they would like to know. And if it isn't gonna affect them immediately, I would like to be sure that Permit Sonoma knows that they're gonna have to do a roadshow on the coast so that the public can comment on all these issues, including the issues that C is concerned about. And those will be hotly debated.
I mean, if I may respond, I mean,
Thank you.
I'm giving you what I think is my understanding of what they're planning to do, but I haven't seen what they're planning to move forward on April 24th,
Okay,
unless it's identical to what they moved through previously to the board.
okay,
And, you know, while I work closely with them, I will say that through this process, and I mean, you know, I'm being recorded, right? But like, I would say that I've worked with them extensively on inland, and I still feel like I was given incomplete information
mhm,
and that they change things. So even if I believe that this is what they're saying and that this is what they intend, it's possible that you'll see something different on April 24th.
Okay.
And so you need to assume that your people probably need to be there, because I
Okay.
can't guarantee that this is right. I mean, I worked with them on the River Mac one and the framing there. And I don't feel like that's what's reflected. And yet they're sort of using the fact that they work with us to say that they have community support, right? So I think that there needs to be some skepticism. And I think that people who are concerned should show up and hold them to account, whether it's about this specific content, whether it's about the longer term vision, whether it's about how they work with the coast as a whole. I think all those things should be on the table.
okay.
They're behind. I get it. They have a lot of work. Gary's retiring. They're swamped and are
Yeah.
struggling, right? But I mean, for the inland maps, They delayed for months and months because they needed to work on their innovative map. That interactive map was posted yesterday. And the link is wrong, and I had to email them today and say change it. So.
My
I mean-
heart goes out to you,
Yeah,
Leo,
it's-
and we really appreciate it.
So I mean, this is, I think that this is a good faith representation of where they are, and I'm thinking that this is just the initial step for doing what they can do now to try to implement the business licenses, which the board and the public generally were supportive of, although they're still,
Well, and it's my understanding that the people at Sea Ranch are generally supportive of the business license as well. But somebody needs to tell them what they're supposed to do.
And I would say to definitely engage, especially if they're kind of thinking, oh, well, this won't apply to the coast now, but it will later, then it means that you actually want to get in the first round of engagement, right? And not try to tweak something after it's already been done.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Carolyn?
Well, could you raise that? up again?
Oh, yes, sorry.
I mean, as I read the words that are being added to this, I feel a penalizing under the thumb. When we've got high concentration of vacation rental, I think it's because it's attractive, people want to be here. And there are limited resources, and when you put certain areas, certain businesses, certain properties more under the thumb, that's going to keep anything from happening. And then I think that the real red herring is that there's not affordable housing. So all of these mixtures need to be looked at differently, and just putting in this stop it now, I think is problematic. And it's like the ones who've already gotten it, well, I've got mine. And I think, well, you know.
Okay, I'm sure, go ahead.
Okay, I agree totally with Carolyn. The Sea Ranch has a long tradition going back to 1965 of substantial vacation rentals, because then and throughout the history, that has been a way that ordinary people could afford to buy a home on the coast. And for many of them, it was a dream in retirement, but renting it out allowed them to continue to own it. And the best data we have indicates that the number of rental houses has been pretty stable for the last 10 years at least, and more houses have been built. And that means that we aren't seeing a bigger and bigger percentage of rental houses there. And it's a hot topic in the Sea Ranch community, because there are people who want rigorous density restrictions that are contrary to our history. And there are other people who don't want that.
So,
And I just want to be sure that we are able to have the discussion.
so just to clarify, the discussion of that C proposed wouldn't necessarily require density restrictions. But I guess my question would be, as I understand it, on the river, those density restrictions are localized.
Yes, and so I very rarely say that, hey, you guys are just like the river, because you're very different, right? But in this case, like, this is the exact same conversation that we had in the Lower Russian River. It's a historic vacation rental sort of summer home area, right? And yet what it came down to was the word balance, right? How do you keep sort of the neighborhood in balance with the sort of tourism-based use? And balance is really hard to achieve, but when you've gone too far, right? And so that's, it actually ended up being a localized plan in terms of percentage caps. And then we actually sort of extended it so that we didn't wind up with a squeeze the toothpaste where, okay, so it's banned in this area. So it all then, comes over and impacts this very similar neighborhood that has a slightly different zoning. So it will really be that kind of a conversation. We're not going to solve for that tonight, but we're just hoping, my hope would be that the policy sets up the framework to identify all of the different things that we'll discuss later when we're implementing.
So I mean, I say this because Bodega Bay is a much easier commute from San Francisco and the populated areas. So that our areas, we have experienced a pretty dramatic increase. Whereas Sea Ranch hasn't, because it's basically always really far away from the populated. And so it's, no offense, but it's an extra hour.
And it makes people sick.
So that is,
Them out.
but I mean, this is a good thing.
And we have
in that- Yeah, a lot too. So, but it is a good thing that we present the option to, between the coastal communities that, Bodega Bay wants to impose housing caps that we could, but Sea Ranch wouldn't have. So, okay,
I think that the
So actually-
language that she's asking is these are issues that can be considered in making these determinations. It doesn't say one size fits
Right.
all. It says these are the issues. I think that's a good idea that we
Yeah.
support them.
okay, that,
All I'm gonna add to this is I'm just wanting to make sure that this is a conversation issue. This is not an action item for us. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. That's all I had.
is there any other conversation on this?
Bottom line is community, and it's gonna come down to, maybe allowing some affordable housing to go in.
Well, that is a very different conversation than one that I would like to pursue at a later date. And,
Yeah. For discussion.
yes, okay.
Are we done?
So I would like to, we haven't done the staff report or the supervisor report.
It's done. We did it.
Okay.
We did the whole meeting.
Okay, so it is, because it is 8:30 now, and I do, I don't envy the Sea Ranch folks. So I think we have had most of the conversation sort of in between. But we will, next time, we will make sure that we have a longer period of time for you guys to do that.
Was the roads list in the packet? Roads paving
It
list,
wasn't in the
okay,
packet,
so
but we
just
have it here.
please see that. I won't refer to it now, but the coast is getting a little bit of love. We obviously always have more needs than we have funds, but
Okay,
There's
great.
grants in the back as well, depending on the.
Oh, this is great. Okay. All right. Okay, so that is the end of our agenda. Does anybody make a motion to?
I'll move that we adjourn.
Thank you.
I
Is there a
second.
There's a second. Without objection, can I do that?
I want to have a slumber party.
We should plan.
So,
We didn't plan.
okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, we are adjourned.
good thought.
Thank you, everybody. that